Tuesday, January the 29th, 1991. The President of the United States, George Herbert Walker Bush. The State of the Union Address to the Congress of the United States. I come to this House of the people to speak to all Americans. Certain we stand at a defining hour. Halfway around the world we are engaged in a great struggle. In the skies and on the seas and sands. He was, of course, speaking about the Gulf War. We know why we are there. We are Americans, part of something larger than ourselves. What is at stake is more than a small country. It is a big idea. A new world order. Such is a world worthy of our struggle and worthy of our children's future. The New World Order. A 4-hour discussion of the New World Order. A future so horrific that those who are in support of it had to conceal it in secret coded language. Delivered on October the 1st, 2012. A presentation of Publius Productions. Part 1 of 3. If thou art privy to thy country's fate, which happily foreknowing may avoid, O speak. Horatio, Act 1, Scene 1. Hamlet by William Shakespeare. I shall speak. Ralph Epperson, October the 1st, 2012. My name is Ralph Epperson, and I will be the one presenting this information today. Let me explain first that this is a PowerPoint presentation computer program, and it will not allow me to change slides while I am speaking. So this might sound a little disjointed, and there will be short gaps while I am changing slides. It might be important at this point to provide you with a little background information about me and why I wanted to produce this presentation. I'm a graduate of the University of Arizona, but I am sorry to report that a high percentage of what I was taught at the university was simply not true. So I've spent the last 50 years of my life looking into the evidence that this nation is being taken somewhere, and all of that research has convinced me that where we as a nation are going will not be fun. I put my research into a total of 4 books, 17 DVDs, and 5 booklets. I've been honored to appear on 2 History Channel documentaries, which are still being shown on the cable network, and they are entitled The Secrets of the Dollar Bill and The Secrets of the Founding Fathers. I also want you to know that I have no staff working for me, no researchers doing my research for me, no confidential sources sending me information, and no one funding my work. I am solely responsible for what you are about to see and hear. And I will be mentioning my books and some of my DVDs as I progress through this material. I want you to also know that I am granting you permission to make copies of all parts of this DVD, and if you agree with me, may I suggest that you make copies and give them to everyone that you think might watch them, so that others may learn the truth about America's future. And lastly, I would like to ask each of you to serve on a jury. That means I'm urging you to be open and listen to what I'm presenting before you reach a verdict. Because I am convinced that this material will be perhaps the most important speech you will ever hear. The problem is that severe. This, of course, is a photograph of the magnificent Grand Canyon in my home state of Arizona. I've added these squares over the picture to make a point. What I will be discussing on this presentation is a huge puzzle consisting of many individual pieces. And now I have wiped out some of the squares, and even though I have done that, you can still see that this is a nearly complete picture of the Grand Canyon. I'm saying that if you do not agree with certain portions of this presentation, I'm asking you to discard those parts. And I believe you will still be able to see that what I presented is still evidence that there is a secret plan in operation for this world. If I had to completely convince you, I wouldn't even try, because there are many parts of this evidence that is completely contrary to what you believe. So please keep this in mind as you listen to and watch what I will be presenting. I'm going to speak about the subject of the New World Order, something I first discovered in 1985 when I started studying the symbols on the back of our dollar bill. This started me to question the very foundation of this nation, because I've uncovered the evidence that our founding fathers were not great and noble men as we've been taught. I addressed this issue when I went on a 91-city, 31-state speaking tour across the United States between the years 1985 and 87 with my first book entitled The Unseen Hand. This book has been published for 27 years and is being reprinted now in 7 foreign nations. And the title of my speech was Secret Societies and the New World Order. In other words, I was discussing this thing called the New World Order, something that I discovered in 1985, 5 years before I heard George Bush mention the phrase in 1990. When I first found this, I questioned my research because I had a great deal of difficulty in accepting this premise. And I believe that you will have a great difficulty in accepting it as well. I have found the evidence that our founding fathers dedicated this nation to a secret destiny in at least 1782, to a thing that they called the New World Order. I will discuss this secret destiny in this presentation as it progresses. But President Bush's reference to a New World Order on January the 29th, 1991 was not the first time he mentioned the phrase. This is a rather poor quality of the poor quality copy of the Birmingham News of September the 11th, 1990, wherein they informed their readers that a New World Order would be forged by the Gulf Crisis. The article said, President Bush will tell Congress tonight that the Persian Gulf Crisis has forged a new world order. And this is the close-up of the date of that speech to be delivered that night in Congress, September the 11th, the very day of the World Trade Towers attack 11 years later. And as I will discuss in a few minutes, there's reason to believe that George Bush picked that very day, September the 11th, because 11 years later, it was the very day that the New World Order began. And only a few have connected these 2 days, September the 11th, 1990, with September the 11th, 2001. And 2 of these people are Ralph Epperson and President George Herbert Walker Bush. But the American people will, in the main, think it is just another coincidence. But whatever this New World Order is, President Bush is not the only one wishing it. This is another poor quality photocopy of the June 5th, 1990 Milwaukee Sentinel newspaper, and as you can see, the headline reads, Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev urges New World Order. You will notice that he called for a New World Order just a few months before George Bush did. Even Fidel Castro called for a New World Order, but his call was even earlier than either of these 2 leaders. His call was on October the 12th, 1979, at least 11 years earlier than Gorbachev's call. Now this raises a very serious question. Fidel Castro is a communist. Mikhail Gorbachev is a communist, but George Bush is a capitalist. How can two communists and one capitalist both want the same thing? We have been taught that the communists hate the capitalists as an exploiter of the working classes. They are two diametrically opposed views of man's need for a world government, yet here they both want the same thing. One can only wonder how this can work. If it is a world where both have their own styles of government, this cannot be a new world order because this is what we have already. So it must be something else. And this will become clear as to how a communist and a capitalist can both want the same form of government as I progress through this presentation. So whatever it is, the New World Order will be brought into power by the United States, at least according to a quotation from Henry Kissinger, President Nixon's Secretary of State. This is what he said in 1976, 14 years before Bush mentioned the phrase. America is uniquely endowed to play a creative and decisive role in the new order which is taking form around us. So the United States will provide the wind to drive the sails of the new world order. And once again, he said this 14 years before George Herbert Walker Bush mentioned the phrase. So let me start with an examination of the Great Seal of the United States as printed on the back of our dollar bill. I would dare say that an overwhelming majority of the American people have no idea what all of these symbols shown here mean, yet all of us carry some of these dollar bills with us at all times. So let me start with some basic information about the Great Seal. These two circles that constitute the two sides of the Great Seal of the United States were unanimously approved by our founding fathers in 1782. First of all, we now have to examine what a government seal is and the reasons it was created. The original seal was melted wax dripped onto the front of a document or upon the fold of some document to seal it. Once the wax starts to cool, the king would press his ring into the wax as a way of making the document official. Notice that such a seal would have only one side. But the American seal has two sides. And now I would like to introduce you to Manly P. Hall, perhaps the most prolific of all of the writers on the subject of the occult mysteries. By the way, the word occult is defined by a dictionary as hidden from sight, obscure. Mr. Hall wrote a book discussing the occult, meaning hidden secrets of the Great Seal, in 1944. His book was entitled The Secret Destiny of America, in which he discussed this nation's future and how the Great Seal played a part in concealing that future from the American people. He wrote, "There exists in the world today, and has existed for thousands of years, a body of enlightened humans united in what might be termed an order of the quest. It is composed of those whose intellectual and spiritual perceptions have revealed to them that civilization has a secret destiny." Secret, I say, because this high purpose is not realized by the many. So the world civilization has a secret destination, one that the average citizen does not know anything about. Now, I have known about this new civilization since around 1985, and I've done all that I could to prevent it. This is how I feel many times. I'm trying to stop these planners from pushing the earth over a cliff and into the New World Order. Yet I continue. So now that we know that, let me now return to the writings of Mr. Hall. If this design on the upper side of the seal is stamped with the signature of the Order of the Quest, the design on the reverse side is even more definitely related to the mysteries. So Mr. Hall was telling us that both sides are full of symbols, but the pyramid side, called the reverse side, is especially significant. Mr. Hall also discussed the Order of the Quest in another of his books entitled The Secret Teachings of All Ages, published in 1977. Not only were many of the founders of the United States Masons, now here we're talking about the Freemasons, and we'll cover them in more detail a little later, but the Masons received aid from a secret body in Europe. Now, Mr. Hall does not say who this secret body in Europe was, but it appears to have been the Illuminati, formed in 1776 in Bavaria, now part of Germany, by Adam Weishaupt about the same time that the founders of this nation were creating the United States. He continued, which helped them to establish this country for a particular purpose, known only to the initiated few. So America had a particular purpose, a secret destiny, known only to the Illuminati, the Order of the Quest, and the Masons. Mr. Hall further told us who at least one of the group known as the Order of the Quest was. He wrote this on page 134 of The Secret Destiny of America. Benjamin Franklin spoke for the Order of the Quest, and most of the men who worked with him were also members. So the Illuminati, the Order of the Quest, and the Masons created this nation with a secret destiny not to be known to the average American. And then Mr. Hall tells his readers where the evidence of this conspiracy can be found. Here are once again both sides of the Great Seal of the United States, as reprinted on the back of every American dollar bill. Mr. Hall tells us that it does have a purpose on page 181 of his book entitled The Secret Destiny of America, and in additional writings of his. There is only one possible origin of these symbols, and that is the secret societies which came to this country 150 years before the American Revolution. The American Revolutionary War started in 1776, so 150 years prior to that year would be 1626, about the same time the Pilgrims and the Puritans came to America. So Mr. Hall is saying that at about the same time the first settlers were coming to America, another group came who intended to set this nation up with a secret purpose in mind. Mr. Hall continued, the Great Seal was directly inspired by the Order of the Quest, and it set forth the purpose for this nation. What he was saying was that these symbols on our dollar bill are related to the ancient worship of the ancient mystery religion. So now let me spend some time explaining just what some of these symbols on the Great Seal of the United States mean. This is the reverse side by itself. I would now like to define the Latin phrase annuit septis novus ordo seclorum. The word annuit is defined as the announcement of or the announcing of. The word septis is defined as the conception of or the birth of. The word novus is defined as new. The word ordo is translated to order. and the word seclorum is defined as world. So taken all together, the phrase is defined as announcing the birth of the New World Order. Then notice the Roman numerals on the base of the pyramid. They are the Roman letters meaning the number 1776. Arguably, one could conclude that this was because it was in the year of 1776 that America declared its independence from Great Britain. But it could also mean the year that Adam Weishaupt founded the secret society known as the Illuminati. It will be your choice as to which explanation is the correct one. Now let me point out that the eye is above the pyramid and not upon it. When the eye lands on the top of the pyramid, the New World Order will commence. In other words, the work of creating the New World Order is not done as of yet. It is set for a date in the future. As I said, the Great Seal was created and unanimously approved by the Founding Fathers in 1782. Now let me start with some basic definitions. There are basically two different views of historical events. The first is called the accidental view of history. And it holds that no one really knows why wars, depressions, and revolutions happen. They just do. This is the view taught by most historians, but my 50 years of research has convinced me that this view is an enormous lie. Perhaps the best evidence that it is this statement: history is written by the victors. Or in this case, history is written by the planners. However, I believe the evidence teaches what I call the conspiratorial view of history, and it is the one that I have dedicated my adult life to making public. This view holds that the major events of the past have been planned by a conspiracy years in advance. This is a picture that appeared in my local newspaper many years ago, showing a bunch of doves standing on telephone lines. I use this slide frequently in my lectures as a way of showing what the price is for believing in the conspiratorial view of history. I tell those in the audience that one of these birds believes in the conspiratorial view of history, and we'll let you guess which dove that is. Now let me define the word conspiracy. It is defined as two or more people meeting in secret with an evil plan. Obviously, if you have an evil plan, you must work in secret, because if the people found out about it before it occurred, they would expose it and not allow the event to occur. And the reason is obvious. Good people with a good plan seek publicity. Evil people with an evil plan seek secrecy. This is Alice Bailey, a supporter of this New World Order. She wrote this in her book entitled The Externalization of the Hierarchy on page 670. The one thing which humanity needs today is the realization that there is a plan, which is definitely working out through all world happenings. All that has happened lately is assuredly in line with that plan. Another who is in agreement with that plan is Benjamin Creme, who wrote this in his book entitled The Reappearance of the Christ. In every age, teachers have come forth from this spiritual center. They are the custodians of a plan. They are a hierarchy of masters who substand all world events and constitute the invisible government of the planet. Now, I would like to bring to your attention someone else who is in support of this plan, someone you would all be familiar with, and that is President Bill Clinton. elected in 1992 and 1996, shown here as the Time Magazine's 1992 Man of the Year. By the way, notice how Time Magazine placed this picture in front of the two uprights of the letter M. were they trying to tell us something? This is Mr. Clinton addressing the nation on the night of July 16, 1992. That was the night he gave his acceptance speech after he had received the nomination of his party as their presidential candidate. It was during this speech that Clinton told the American people more than they wanted to know. Clinton and his vice presidential nominee Al Gore wrote a book in 1992 entitled Putting People First, so that we would know exactly what their program for the future was. This book has a complete transcript of the speech starting on page 217. And this is page 231, where he gave his thanks to two individuals who gave him the urging to become involved in politics. This is what Clinton said that night. As a teenager, I heard John Kennedy's summons to citizenship. And then, as a student at Georgetown University, I heard that call clarified by a professor I had named Carol Quigley. And to understand how he told us he is in support of this plan, we must begin in the summer of 1963. The future president met President Kennedy during the Boys Nation conference held during that summer. The media has published a photograph of Mr. Clinton shaking the hand of the then president during the meeting that he and some of the other attendees had with him. Mr. Clinton had been selected from his home state of Arkansas as one of their delegates to the national conference, and those who arranged that conference scheduled this meeting with the president. Bill Clinton was a junior in 1962 and 63, and a senior between 1963 and, of course, 1964. So those who heard Mr. Clinton's nationally televised address that night in 1992 certainly knew who John Kennedy was. However, it is doubtful that many knew who Carol Quigley, the second name Clinton mentioned, was. But there are some who did know, and I was one of those because I had read two of the professor's books prior to 1992 and therefore knew how important he was to our understanding of the nature and motives of this plan. And now America can know as well, because it is important that we all learn who Carol Quigley was and what he taught Bill Clinton. Because Clinton knows, in fact, he not only knew him, he praised him on a live, nationally telecast speech. As I said, Bill Clinton went to Georgetown for 4 years, from 1964 to 1968. And the reason that is significant is because Dr. Quigley wrote the first of his two books in 1966, somewhere between Clinton's sophomore and junior years. That book is entitled Tragedy and Hope, and this book itself tells us a little background information on the doctor. Carol Quigley earned his Bachelor of Arts, Master of Arts, and PhD degrees at Harvard. He's currently Professor of History at the Foreign Service School of Georgetown University, formerly taught at Princeton and at Harvard. So Dr. Quigley would be called a liberal establishment PhD. This is a poor quality copy of a 2-page article that appeared in the Georgetown University Alumni Magazine in the winter of 1993. The headline reads, Clinton and the Class of 1968. So this article appeared around the 25th anniversary of Clinton's graduation in the class of 1968. And this is a close-up of the right-hand side of this two-page article. And you will notice that it says that his book, Tragedy and Hope, was, quote, required reading for his course, end quote. So we can now read what Bill Clinton read for one of Dr. Quigley's courses. And this is what Dr. Quigley wrote on page 950 of his book. There does exist and has existed for a generation, meaning around 40 years, back to around 1926. There does exist an international Anglophile network, meaning that the network is basically controlled by Englishmen, which operates to some extent in the way the radical right believes the Communists act. In fact, this network has no aversion to cooperating with the communists or any other group, and frequently does so. It has been my contention ever since around 1970 that Dr. Quigley was correct about the fact that someone else besides the communists were controlling both international and national communism. I first read the works of researcher Anthony Sutton about that same time, and his well-documented research still stands as the ultimate source for the evidence that Russian communism was created, financed, and controlled by American and English bankers since before the first Bolshevik communist revolution in 1905. So what Bill Clinton read from Dr. Quigley's book came as no surprise to me. And Dr. Quigley had added another thought, one that is very rare in the history of the research into the conspiratorial view of history. He said that he had written his book because he supported the conspiracy he had been researching. This is what he wrote on page 950. I know of the operations of this network because I've studied it for 20 years, meaning back to around 1946, and was permitted for 2 years in the early 1960s while he was writing his book to examine its papers and secret records. I have no aversion to it. I have no aversion to it, or to most of its aims, and have for much of my life been close to it or to many of its instruments. I have objected both in the past and recently to a few of its policies, but in general my chief difference of opinion is that it wishes to remain unknown, and I believe its role in history is significant enough to be known. The careful reader of the preceding quote from the book by Dr. Quigley will notice that he made 3 very important observations. He knew about this network 20 years before his book was published, meaning that he learned about it after World War II. In other words, 1966 minus 20 is 1946. He claimed that he had been allowed to review their secret papers for 2 years before he wrote his book. And most importantly, he supported most of this conspiracy's aims. In other words, this network wanted Dr. Quigley to write his book because they allowed him to review their private papers. That means that they wanted him to make his research public. That means they wanted him to teach others about their existence to certain young people who attended his classes at Georgetown University, young people like Bill Clinton. By the way, this might be a good time to introduce a name whom you might know who also wrote in support of this conspiracy. This is a book called David Rockefeller Memoirs, in which he made this extremely rare comment. This is that comment marked in yellow, and I would like to bring it to your attention because when this man speaks, he speaks with authority. As you can see, it is a long paragraph, and I shall try to reduce it down to just what he was trying to say as a way of saving time. This is what he wrote. For more than a century, extremists at either end of the political spectrum, of course that means people like me writing from the political right, these extremists have attacked the Rockefeller family as being a part of a secret cabal and conspiring to build a global and economic structure. One world, if you will. If that is the charge, I stand guilty and I am proud of it. I cannot think of anyone with more outside influence in our political and economic institutions than David Rockefeller. So when he reports that those of us opposed to his involvement are correct, he is really admitting something very rare. I don't know anyone who could explain it better than he. Now to show you a little of Mr. Rockefeller's Mr. Rockefeller's outside influence, I did a little research on the internet for pictures of him with world leaders, and I found 4 rather poor quality ones. First, here he is with the Russian communist leader Nikita Khrushchev. This is him with the Russian communist leader Alexei Kosygin. And this one with Chinese communist Zhou Enlai. And lastly, this one with Cuban communist Fidel Castro. Notice that Mr. Rockefeller is shown meeting with communists. While I was at the University of Arizona, I was taught that the capitalists and the communists hated each other, preferring that the other's economic system was inferior to their own. But here we see him, a capitalist, with 4 communist leaders. And notice, he was not arrested and tried for his crimes of exploiting the masses. Would someone please explain this to me, because my professors did not? And please answer this question for me. Who elected him to meet with representatives of government? I thought it was our elected leaders who were supposed to speak for us when they met with world leaders. Now we know that Joe Quigley was telling us the truth when he said, in fact, this network has no aversion to cooperating with the communists or any other group, and frequently does so. And this cartoon that appeared in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch in 1911 shows this cooperation well. It depicted the cartoon figure of John D. Rockefeller, David's grandfather, as joining with a group of other Wall Street financiers and bankers welcoming Karl Marx, the communist, to Wall Street. I placed a photograph of John D. to the right jacketed cartoon figure of John D. to show you that the cartoonist pictured him correctly. Some of the others in the cartoon are J.P. Morgan, the Wall Street banker, and what appears to be former President Teddy Roosevelt in the center in the glasses. This cartoon shows that the Rockefellers, as a family, liked meeting with communist leaders. First it was John D., and now it is David, his grandson. Notice that the cartoonist showed red flags hanging from various windows on Wall Street. The communists have been known as the Reds for many years. The implication here must be that even the average worker in Wall Street welcomed Karl Marx and his communist ideas as well. So they hung out red flags as a way of welcoming him. Now let me bring to your attention someone else who was in support of this network. This was one of the individuals named by Dr. Quigley as being a heavily involved member of this international Anglophile network. And that individual is Cecil Rhodes. Mr. Rhodes had an interesting past. He was born in 1853 and moved to Africa while still a young man of 16. Dr. Quigley told us that he had plans on acquiring enormous wealth and influence. He wrote that it was Cecil Rhodes' chartered company, called, by the way, the British South Africa Company, which opened up Rhodesia. The African nation known as Rhodesia, now called Zimbabwe, was named after Cecil Rhodes after he feverishly exploited the diamond and gold fields of South Africa. The way that Rhodes got control of the diamond and gold fields of South Africa was to start a war called the Boer War that lasted from 1899 to 1902. He arranged for the British government to send soldiers to fight it so he could, quote, feverishly exploit the diamond and gold fields, end quote. Now I'm certain that the relatives of the 60,000 military and civilian casualties killed in the war understood that their family members died to assist Rhodes in taking control of the diamond and gold fields. Mr. Rhodes kept changing his last will and testament as he left a total of 7 different documents upon his death. It was in these wills that Rhodes left part of his great fortune to fund the Rhodes scholarships at Oxford University. It was the purpose of Rhodes to fund a scholarship program for young idealists to attend Oxford University to learn the secret plan of the founder, a world under the control of this international Anglophile network. It was his desire that these young students would attend Oxford for at least 3 years, and then after their return to their nation, they would work to achieve the goal of the founder. Now, where did Bill Clinton go after he graduated from Georgetown in 1968? Why, of course, he went to Oxford on a Rhodes scholarship. Yes, indeed. Bill Clinton learned his lessons well from his mentor, Dr. Carroll Quigley. This is the top part of the U.S. News and World Report article about Clinton's years at Oxford. The midsection of the article shows 7 of the Rhodes Scholarship students with Bill Clinton in the center. So Mr. Clinton learned about the plan and how he should do his part in implementing it. That is not all that Bill Clinton learned. This is a picture of Bill and Hillary in 1970 while he was a student at Oxford. You can see that they bought into the lifestyle of the hippie youth. So now that we know that there is a plan and a few of the individuals supporting it, it is now time to start examining just how this all fits together. But first I would like to discuss how and why they're attempting to deliver on the New World Order. The Council on Foreign Relations, a secret organization of national leaders in politics, business, academia, and the media, published a quarterly magazine called Foreign Affairs. The April 1974 edition contained an article written by Richard N. Gardner that reported that we are likely to do better by building our house of world order from the bottom up rather than the top down, and then run around national sovereignty, eroding it piece by piece, is likely to get us to world order faster than the old-fashioned assault. What that means is that this network is going to take it one step at a time until they have the entire plan in place. And this thought was printed in page 115 of Aldous Huxley's book entitled Brave New World Revisited. In the end, the people will lay their freedom at our feet and say to us, "Make us your slaves, but feed us." And this author explained just what the problem was. It was Christianity. This is Terry Cole Whitaker, who wrote these thoughts in her book entitled The Inner Path from Where You Are to Where You Want to Be. First of all, Miss Whitaker was a Christian television evangelist in Southern California until 1985, when she abandoned her ministry and became an advocate of what has been called the New Age religion. She reported that she went to a one-week retreat led by a woman named J.Z. Knight, who claimed to channel a spiritual being named Ramtha. According to her website, Ramtha is at least 35,000 years old. Although he is not human, he is reportedly 7 feet tall and appears to be pretty hip. He said he is, quote, "not considered politically correct," end quote. I would not expect that those last words were used 35,000 years ago, so he is in tune with today's modern language. But Miss Knight says she channels him at times during her lectures. Apparently he does not appear to the audience, he is channeled. In other words, Ramtha takes over J.Z. Knight's body and speaks through her. And Miss Whitaker believed in what Ramtha was saying to the audience. Now let me tell you, I will provide you now with a series of thoughts that Miss Whitaker now believes, taken from her book. You are God, I am God, together we are God. All that God is, you are. Now whenever I hear someone say this, I ask them to prove it. I urge them to make the sky pink. The God that I worship made it blue. And since you claim to be God, you must have the same power. Now I've been waiting for at least 10 years for one of these gods, or many of these gods, to make the sky pink. The fact that the sky is still blue must tell us something about this claim of Miss Knight's students. Miss Whitaker goes on. There is no one single right way and no one single truth. Everybody's truth is right for them. What feels good is what you will do. It's all right to do whatever brings you happiness. I would like to take a break from these comments written by Miss Whitaker and discuss a similar statement to her last one. When this nation's founding fathers declared their independence from Great Britain in 1776, they issued the Declaration of Independence that contained this statement: all men are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now I've long wondered about this right and what they meant by it. Were they saying that each man was endowed by his Creator with the right to be a cannibal if it brought him, quote, happiness, end quote? Surely this phrase is confusing, because it is certain the cannibal would claim that his Creator granted him the right to be a cannibal according to this grant of power because he needs food to satisfy his physical needs, meaning it'll make him happy. If I could go back to the days when they were discussing the wording of the Declaration of Independence, I would certainly raise this question: just what do you mean by this phrase, the pursuit of happiness? Surely they could have chosen another phrase to substitute for this one. Now let me return to the thoughts of Miss Terry Cole Whitaker. You will cherish your children, and they will be allowed to become their own master. Now please do not think that you will be allowed to teach your children right from wrong. because your children will make those decisions for themselves. As she said, your children will be allowed to become their own master, making their own decisions. If they want to play in the traffic, let them become their own master, and do not remove them from the road. That's how you will cherish your children in the future. Finally, I said to myself, nothing is going to stop me. I have a right to do what I want. And I have a right to do it without asking. Give everyone the freedom to live. Give everyone the freedom to live as they chose. The good news is that sin is nonsense. You are guiltless. None of what you have done is wrong. There is no such thing as wrong in God's world. God allows. God does not judge. There will be no more tyrants and no more organizations to tell us what is good for us and what is bad. The new age will mean the end of religion. So there will be no more government and no more religion because they dare to tell us what is good and what is bad. This is an overhead diagram of a street intersection. You have the right to go from the south to the north, just as I have the right to go from the west to the east. Now, if we both go at the same time, there'll be a collision in the red area. This slows down the traffic for both you and I. So reasonable men and women agree to put a traffic light to control the traffic. It stops the traffic in one direction while it allows the traffic in the other direction to move through the intersection without impediment. Now, according to Terry Cole Whitaker, there'll be no more governments to tell us what to do. That means there will be no more traffic lights regulating the flow of traffic, because governments tell us what is good and what is bad. They restrict someone's right to go north to allow someone to go east. According to her thinking, that is the very definition of tyranny. Governments and religion tell us what is good and what is bad. And as I just showed you, this will be the result when the traffic light is removed. Boy, what a paradise this will be. Welcome to this vision of the New World Order. Now, what if you say no to this new religion? Miss Whitaker addressed that issue as well. Those who oppose such a vision, by the way, as taught by Ramtha, will in fact simply disappear. Yes, you heard that correctly. Those who oppose such a vision will in fact simply disappear. Miss Whitaker obviously has not given this much thought because she didn't say just how this will happen. But understand this. This thought is not unique to Miss Whitaker. There are people saying this all over the world, and those who claim this are not speaking of a biblical rapture of the believers in Christ. She's talking about the murder of billions of people all over the world. Now I wonder how she will react if Ramtha speaks to her and tells her that she must murder thousands of people. But as I said, she's not the only one talking about millions of people simply disappearing. Let me provide you with just one example of those who talk about reducing the population. These are called the Georgia Guidestones in rural Elbert County in Georgia. They consist of 4 granite slabs, each about 19 feet tall, that contain a set of guidelines for the future. These guidelines are chiseled in 8 modern languages, one of which, of course, is English. I shall only mention one of those guidestones because it is pertinent to the subject currently being discussed. And that one reads, maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature. There are approximately 7 billion people on the earth right now, so if the goal is to reduce worldwide population down to 500 million, you will need to murder 13/14 of the world's population. That's approximately 92% of the world's population. But just like Miss Whitaker, the Guidestones do not tell us how they will accomplish that. They just say it. But they want 92% of the world's population to simply disappear. Welcome to this vision of the New World Order. Now perhaps this is your first exposure to what this New World Order is, but that is exactly what it is. Each person will be free to decide for themselves in all cases. And there will be only 500 million of us to enjoy this new paradise on earth. I will now spend the rest of the time attempting to show you that this is exactly what the New World Order is. Alice Bailey wrote about the new religion, the one endorsed by Terry Cole Whitaker. She wrote this in her book entitled The Externalization of the Hierarchy. The New World Religion is nearer than many think. She was one of the many who wanted to destroy all religion and replace religion with what has been called the New Age religion. So the New Age religion will destroy all religion and government. This obviously means there will be no more priests, pastors, or rabbis, and no more churches or synagogues, because they're the ones who are telling us what is good and bad for us. Obviously, they're speaking about governments as well, because governments teach us what is good and what is bad, punishing those who harm others or their property. Now, before you think that this is preposterous, that no one could believe such nonsense, please let me reassure you, this is exactly what the New World Order will be. Let me continue now with additional information on this thing called the New World Order. This is once again Benjamin Creme, another advocate for the New Age religion, who has written another book called Maitreya's Mission, and this is what he wrote on page 3. We are moving into a period of climax, leading to events which will fundamentally alter life as we know it. Tremendous changes are taking place in all areas of life, preparatory to the establishment of new modes of social living and relationship. We are standing at the beginning of a new era. Perhaps the best analysis of this New World Order and the changes it will bring was offered by Alvin Toffler in this book entitled The Third Wave, published in 1980. The inside back cover informs the reader that Mr. Toffler is one of the world's best known social thinkers, and he has been described as a futurist. His works are read in more than 50 countries. His credentials seem to be impressive. In other words, when he speaks, nations listen. But I want to make one point absolutely clear. Mr. Toffler is in total support of the changes he is predicting for the world, and Ralph Epperson is in total opposition. Now let me discuss what his views are. He explains on page 1 that the proverbial man in the street says that the world has gone mad. This book contends that the world has not swerved into lunacy, and that, in fact, beneath the seemingly senseless events lies a startling and potentially hopeful pattern. Many of today's changes are not independent of one another, nor are they random. Many of the changes may seem like isolated events, but the seemingly unrelated trends are interconnected. They are in part of a much larger phenomenon: the death of industrialism and the rise of a new civilization. And then he explains what this new civilization will bring to the world on page 9. This new civilization brings with it new family styles, new or changed ways of working, changed ways of loving, changed ways of living, a new economy, and new political conflicts. The dawn of this new civilization is the single most explosive fact of our lifetimes. And he continues, humanity faces a quantum leap forward. It faces the deepest social upheaval and creative restructuring of all time. We, which means of course he's in support, we are engaged in building a remarkable new civilization from the ground up. When we understand this, many seemingly senseless events become suddenly comprehensible. So there you have it. The New World Order is a total revamping of our civilization. End of part 1. Please go to part 2. Part 2. Perhaps this testimony of a medical doctor will assist us in understanding just how this religion is already changing America. I was invited to speak in early 1989 to an organization in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and after the program had ended, a gentleman stepped forward and told me that he was a medical doctor at a hospital in Pittsburgh and that he wanted to speak with me privately. So I suggested that we meet in my hotel room the next morning before I was scheduled to leave for the airport. He agreed, and the next morning he visited my room. He told me that he was a pediatrician, and after completing his medical studies, he interned in a hospital in Pittsburgh. He reported that he and his supervising doctor, also a pediatrician, became good friends. He identified this other doctor as being Dr. Richard L. Day, who later that year of 1965 quit and was named medical director for the Planned Parenthood organization in New York City. He stayed there for 3 years, choosing to leave in 1968 to teach at a medical school at a university in New York. And on March the 20th, 1969, he returned to Pittsburgh to address the Pittsburgh Pediatrician Society. My doctor provided me with a copy of the announcement of Dr. Day's speech in the Pittsburgh Medical Association's bulletin. He then asked me to not mention the speaking doctor's name any time I told the story he was about to tell me, and I agreed. And the reason he did was because the doctor was still alive, and he did not want to embarrass him or himself. Sometime after my visit, my doctor sent me a copy of the obituary notice of Dr. Day's passing, and he told me that I could now mention the doctor's name in any telling of this story. Notice that Dr. Day's speech was titled Family Planning, Infant Mortality, Gene Frequency, Abortion, and Other Considerations. And for reasons I'm about to make clear, Dr. Day did not want to talk about family planning, infant mortality, gene frequency, and abortion. He wanted to talk about other considerations. My doctor mentioned that Dr. Day announced to the audience that if he saw anyone recording his speech or making notes, he would leave the stage and not complete his remarks. He further stated that if he had heard anyone claim that he had said anything during this speech, he would disavow that he said that. And lastly, he stated that even if you said anything about his comments, no one would believe you anyway. It was obvious that the good doctor wanted to talk about, quote, other considerations, end quote, from what he learned during his 3 years at Planned Parenthood. My doctor told me that right after he left the speech, he went to his car and wrote down every comment he could remember, and in the intervening years he had added additional comments he had remembered. In fact, the doctor sent me a tape recording of his recollections from this speech several years later, and I will now relate to you what the doctor said that Dr. Day had relayed to the audience. I will take them one at a time in no particular order, but just as my doctor wrote them down. Dr. Day's first comment was, I want you to know that I have discovered an organized force during my stay in New York. This organized force is so powerful that it fears no one or anything. It believes that no one can stop it. I would like to point out that the Pittsburgh doctor said that Dr. Day said he learned about this organized force between 1965 and 1968. I do not know because he did not directly identify how he found out about it. But he certainly could have read the book by Dr. Quigley during those 3 years. You might remember that Dr. Quigley's book entitled Tragedy and Hope was published in 1966 during Dr. Day's stay at Planned Parenthood. As you will see, Dr. Day learned far more than what Dr. Quigley revealed in his book, but it is certainly possible that his reading of this book helped inform him about this organized force. Let me now continue with the thoughts of Dr. Day. There is a timetable constructed by those inside this organized force. Suicide will be promoted and encouraged, and it will become more common. The percentage of children committing suicide will increase because they will be given no hope and no future. Evolution will be taught exclusively in our public schools as a way of teaching the students that there is no God and no future, and that we were all animals having evolved from primates. The population must be limited to 2 children per family. My first exposure to this claim that the earth was overpopulated was in 1973 when I entered my classroom for the first time when I started teaching at a community college in Oregon. There was a corkboard on one corner of the blackboard, and it had a poster similar to this one, but it actually had people falling off of the globe as well as being shoulder to shoulder on the various continents. Dr. Paul Ehrlich, a professor of biology at Stanford University, wrote a book in 1971 entitled The Population Bomb, in which he predicted enormous starvation problems for the world because of overpopulation. This poster was based upon that premise. The world was simply overpopulated. So I asked my students how many of them believed that this was true, and as I recall, about half of them raised their hands. I told them that I had a way to prove that this position was totally false, that the world was not overpopulated, and that I would share that with them during the class on the next day. So I came to the class the next day with a handout showing that this position was a total lie. I started by saying that I was going to move the entire population of the world, around 4 billion people, to the tiny state of Oregon. And then I proposed that I would sink the rest of the continents, meaning Oregon would be the only place on Earth above water. I then took them through the mathematical exercise, showing them how many of them would have to stand on the shoulders of their fellow Oregonians. And the results were 4 billion people living in the state of Oregon, and a family of 4 would have a piece of land 53 by 50 feet. So I asked them if they still believed the world was overpopulated. And I would dare say that I captured the attention of all of my students from that day forward. That was their first exposure to the fact of just how they were being lied to. Now let me return to the comments of Dr. Day. The government will promote contraception by making it universally acceptable. Today, schools are giving out condoms and encouraging children to have sex. Sex will be out in the open, and sex outside of marriage will be promoted. Men would become more feminized and women more masculine. This is Justin Bieber, one of the latest teen singers. Upon reflecting upon his picture, one must ask the question, is he male or female? Travel would become a privilege to increase control of individuals and families. There are 2 areas of interest to examine with this comment by Dr. Day. Gas prices have certainly gone up. This sign was, of course, a year or 2 ago, but it shows just how much higher the gas price could rise permanently. At this price, no one would be able to afford a private passenger automobile except maybe the very wealthy. And the second thing of interest is what this gas price increase has done to the recreational vehicle use around the country. It has certainly increased the cost of operating one. May I suggest that you consider watching my 2-hour DVD entitled $10 a Gallon Gasoline on YouTube. You will see how it is the American government causing this high price of gasoline, and that profits of 500 to 600% are not out of the ordinary for the oil companies of the world. Bridges and roads and other infrastructure will be allowed to deteriorate. We will become desensitized to violence. Musicians would use coded language to reach the young people. Abortion will become normal and tax supported. Planned Parenthood, the employer of Dr. Day, receives tax money collected by the U.S. government. Fathers would have no say in the abortion decision. While I am discussing abortion, I'm certain that the women of the world believe that their body is theirs and that no government can tell them what to do with it. The abortion case of Roe v. Wade was heard by the Supreme Court on January the 22nd of 1973. The court deemed abortion was a fundamental right under the United States Constitution. In other words, your body belongs to you. Once again, this decision was given in 1973. Let me now explain, first of all, that there are millions of people all over the world who believe that Laetrile kills cancer cells in the human body. And people have been consuming Laetrile just like they consume lima beans because they believe they're good for their body. Laetrile is a natural, non-toxic, water-soluble substance, entirely normal to and compatible with human metabolism. The proper name for a food factor that contains these properties is a vitamin. In fact, those researchers into Laetrile have named it vitamin B17. As I said, it occurs abundantly in nature in over 1,200 edible plants and found virtually in every part of the world. It is prevalent in the seeds of bitter almond, apricot, cherry, nectarine, peach, and plum. It is also found in grasses, maize, sorghum, millet, apple seeds, and lima beans. It is also found in buckwheat, alfalfa, peas, beans, lentils, and garbanzo beans. In other words, Laetrile is in our foods, and it is not harmful to the human body. I first learned about Laetrile in 1976 when I read the 2-volume book entitled World Without Cancer by G. Edward Griffin. This book was published in 1974 and has changed the thoughts of hundreds of thousands of people about what cancer is and what is the best way to handle it. Now, if Laetrile occurs naturally in our fruits, seeds, nuts, and certain grasses, then it would follow that everyone has the right to eat Laetrile by simply consuming berries, seeds, nuts, and certain grains. But the Supreme Court does not agree. This is the headline from the second page of an article that appeared on October the 21st, 1980 in my local newspaper. It reads, as you can see, constitutional right to Laetrile rejected. Justices uphold FDA ban. As I said, the Food and Drug Administration, abbreviated to the FDA, declared that terminal cancer patients do not have a constitutional right to use Laetrile. So the cancer patient took his case to the Supreme Court. The body that ruled in the Roe versus Wade case that it is the human's body. And it ruled that it is not the cancer patient's body if he believes that Laetrile will cure his cancer. But that raises an interesting question for the Supreme Court. If a terminal cancer patient does not have the right to take Laetrile because it is not his body, how can he give the surgeon the permission to use conventional methods to rid his body of cancer? He must say, I'm sorry, doctor, I do not have the right to my body, so I can use Laetrile. So I cannot give you permission to use your more conventional means to cure my cancer. I guess I will just have to grin and bear it. This is how stupid, and I mean stupid, this Supreme Court decision is. You've got to admit, your body belongs to the government. Here is an interesting thought for you. Let's say your mom says to you, eat your lima beans, they're good for you. She can be jailed for urging you to consume a banned substance. Oh, well, that'll never happen here. This is America, land of the free. One can only conclude that there is a hidden reason for this strange paradox in the thinking of the Supreme Court. And Dr. Day told us it would come to pass on March the 20th, 1969. By the way, let me quote part of the Hippocratic Oath taken by medical doctors going all the way back 2,400 years to the late 5th century BC. The oath written by Hippocrates, the father of medicine, around 400 BC. I swear that I will not give a woman a pessary to cause an abortion. But that was for an antiquated medical practice. Current doctors are certainly smarter now, many centuries later. The modern version of the oath, written in 1964, simply takes that part out. And the abortion decision followed in 1973. Oh yes, one more thought. Notice that those in favor of abortion have changed the name of the unborn child from baby to fetus. But the New World Order wants to control the population, and what greater way to do so than to encourage abortions? Now notice this. Modern civilizations have determined that killing a baby is called murder, and the murderer has to be punished. Abortion kills a baby, and they wanted to give women that right. So the supporters had to change the name of the baby to a fetus. Therefore, killing a fetus is not murder. I would now like to mention some problems for women who abort their babies. In a January 2006 newsletter entitled The Good Word, the author cited a 13-year study in Finland that was reported in the European Journal of Public Health. They discovered that the suicide rate among women who aborted their babies was 6. Yes, that is 6 times the suicide rate for women who give birth. And I've got a personal story to tell you. The sister-in-law of a friend of mine believed the lie that abortion was just like having an infected tooth being pulled, and secondly, that it is your choice what to do with your body. She later got married, and she and her husband had a child. And suddenly, after she realized how that child was created and born, instantly the thought occurred to her. She knew that she had murdered her first child in an abortion. And now, even years later, when she personally told me her story, she cried as she told me. Yes, a fetus is an unborn child. The London Daily Mail reported in 2010 that abortion is the highest risk factor in breast cancer. And I would also like to comment on another strange paradox in the abortion issue. Some of the courts of this land are not certain that harming a, quote, fetus, end quote, is not a crime. I would like to bring to your attention 4 articles that I've collected over the years that prove this. 1993, doctor convicted in botched abortion, sentenced to at least 10 years in prison. 1993, 2 Missouri women charged with murder in death of 4-month-old fetus. 2004, plot to kill unborn child draws a 25-year sentence. 2009, 23-year sentence in crash that killed a fetus being carried in the woman's body. So killing a fetus in a crash is just the same as murdering a live baby in a crash. That means that fetuses have rights just like human babies do. Notice that some judges say the unborn child is a fetus, and others say it is a baby. But those who support abortion do not make this distinction. It is tissue that has no rights, just like a clipping from a fingernail that can be thrown away after it's cut off of a finger. But some judges believe it is human and that it does have rights. And this article from the Arizona Daily Star in 2009 says that a federal judge in South Dakota ruled that abortion doctors must tell pregnant women that the procedure terminates a life of a human. Notice that he did not say that abortion was murder, because then this judge would have to convict both the doctor who terminates the life of this human and also the women who desire an abortion. So the question remains, is it a baby or a fetus? And aborting the fetus, is it murder? The courts are giving mixed signals. But to those who respect human life, that life begins at conception, know the answer. Stay tuned. This battle is not over yet. The nation's newspapers have been reporting recently that various cities and/or states have made medicinal marijuana legal for smoking. This is, of course, in a recognition that each of us has the right to their body, and therefore substances may be inhaled because of this alleged right. My hometown of Tucson is one of those cities that is going to allow a state-licensed medical marijuana dispensary in the city. They're going to issue a permit to remodel this location for the dispensary. But I see a problem here that needs to be examined. Here is a recent article published in 2012 that makes the claim that marijuana use as a teenager can affect adult IQ. So marijuana is harmful to the body, but various cities and states have made its use legal. In other words, you have a right to inhale harmful substances into your body because it is your body. This article appeared in my local newspaper on September the 11th, 2012, and points out that there is another risk to smoking marijuana. The headline reads, "Marijuana use linked to cancer in men." The article pointed out that your seemingly harmless habit may be increasing your risk of developing the most dangerous forms of testicular cancer. And this article says there will be a price to pay for those cities and states that legalize marijuana for any reason. It was printed in my local newspaper in 2011, and as you can see, the headline reads, "Please say that pot-impaired drivers emerging as road threat." The article reported that 16% of all drivers nationwide at night were on various legal and illegal impairing drugs, half of which, meaning 8%, were high on marijuana. The article mentions that a, quote, heavy marijuana user, end quote, ran his car off of the road and killed a jogger in California. But that's okay, because California is one of the states that has legalized marijuana marijuana use. Now this poses an unusual legal question. Many states make the bartender guilty of serving someone who has consumed too much alcohol in the bartender's saloon when he injures someone in his car after leaving the saloon in an inebriated condition. And the reasoning is that a sober driver would not have committed the crime, presumably unless the bartender had given him too many alcoholic beverages. Now, if this is a precedent, is the state of California responsible for the death of the jogger when the marijuana user was given permission to use the drug? And the answer must be yes, under the same thinking behind the bartender drunken driver law. Now, I'm certain the jogger's wife and children will not grieve the loss of their husband and a father, because they must recognize that the right to medical marijuana is superior to the right to human life. Well done, California. There's another legal problem I see here. Let me use the example of the city of Tucson's willingness to license a marijuana dispensary. Let's say that a Tucsonan suffers an accident similar to the jogger's death in California. When the jogger's family learns that the city had given the marijuana user the legal permission to use the drug, I would think that the family would be able to sue the city as an accessory to the accident. In other words, the reason the marijuana user was high was because the city had licensed a dispensary so that he could legally purchase the drug. Now, I would guess that the attorneys for the city council have instructed the council members that it was a magnificent gesture on their part to risk all of their personal assets should they be held liable to reimburse the family. Certainly, the city council must have known that marijuana had these effects on the user, because these articles were recently printed in Tucson's daily newspaper. And they know that the city taxpayers did not authorize their tax money being used to reimburse the family of anyone injured in an accident involving a medical marijuana user. I would think that since the bartender can be held liable for selling an inebriated customer too much alcohol, the city can be held liable for an accident arising from someone high on medicinal marijuana. Now, I commend the city council members for their willingness to bear the costs of any payments to injured parties. Thank you, City of Tucson council members, for protecting my tax money. Someone just told me that the city council members are not liable. Only the taxpayers are. Oh well, just like Walt Disney, Scrooge McDuck, we taxpayers have lots of money. Now let me return to the comments of Dr. Day. Homosexuality and lesbianism will be encouraged. This is an article that appeared in the June 7, 2011 Arizona Daily Star. It reports that gay and bisexual high school students are more likely than their heterosexual classmates to smoke, drink alcohol, or do other risky things. Investigators asked about dozens of risky behaviors, ranging from drug use to attempted suicide. Gay, lesbian, and bisexual students reported worse behavior in 90% of the risk categories. Boy, that sure comes as a surprise. Those results were confirmed on June the 14th, 2012, when the results of a University of Texas study were released. The headline read, "Study shows homosexual parenting not equal to heterosexual marriage," and reported that children who remain with intact biological families were better educated, experienced greater mental and physical health, less drug experimentation, less criminal activity, and reported higher levels of happiness. Boy, that sure would have fooled me. That's another giant big surprise. But notice this, if the plan is for homosexuality and lesbianism to be pushed, it increases the need for more government-run programs to help when all of these bad effects take place. So the planners must be pleased with the results. Now let me return to the thoughts of Dr. Day. Ultimately, reproduction will be done without sex, meaning it will all be done in test tubes. This step has not been implemented yet, but this medical doctor says that apparently Planned Parenthood wants it as a future agenda. And the reason is obvious. After Obamacare is implemented, the government will be in charge of all medical decisions. Dr. Day did not say this, but the next step follows. The government doctors will have to listen to a bureaucrat who will decide who gets to have a test tube baby. What a way to control the population. Only those who fit government guidelines will be given permission to have a test tube baby. Boy, what a paradise that will be. Divorce will be more prevalent. According to a site on the internet, 50 first marriages and 50% end in divorce. 67% of second marriages end in divorce. 73% of third marriages end in divorce. And what has been the result? I would like to show you two articles from my local newspaper. The first one is dated April the 28th, 2011, and the headline reads, "One-parent homes most prevalent in the U.S. as compared to other nations." And the second one was dated May the 29th, 2011, and the headline reads, "Census data, married couples are no longer majority." So these things are happening according to a plan, and Dr. Day learned about it in the late 1960s. living with your partner will become preferred. This is an article by Meg J. that appeared in the April 14, 2012 New York Times, and it speaks to those who decide to live with their partner before getting married. It reports, cohabiting, the word used to describe living together before marriage. Cohabiting in the United States has increased by more than 1,500% in the past half century. In 1960, about 450,000 unmarried couples lived together, and now the number is more than 7.5 million. And more than half of all marriages will be preceded by cohabitation. And nearly half of those in their 20s agreed with this statement. You would also only marry someone if he or she agreed to live together with you first, so that you could find out whether or not you two really get along. And then the article drew this conclusion. Couples who cohabit before marriage tend to be less satisfied with their marriages and more likely to divorce than couples who do not. So living together before getting married just doesn't work, just as planned. And the plan is to increase divorce. And one of the ways to do that is through the notion that young couples should live together before getting married. And once again, it doesn't work. And that is just as planned. And it is especially interesting when articles like this one appear in the media. This rain-soaked article appeared in 2003, and the headline reads, Study, Marriage Produced More Stable Family. Well, our grandparents were right after all. The marriage commitment is the best of all similar arrangements. Women will be encouraged to work outside of the family. This is a program that started in World War II, because a world war fought in two widely spaced sections of the world required so many men that women, called Rosie the Riveter, were called to duty in the factories to make war materials. And this became a major push of the women's liberation movement until women started figuring it out that they were not being fulfilled at all. I would like to show you an article, although it is older, that seems to indicate that many women did not understand the plan and were returning to their home to raise their children. This is an article that appeared in the Arizona Daily Star in 1994 that reported more women were trading jobs to return to their home. One observer said, this appears to represent a lifestyle shift as women look to reduce the stress generated by a working woman. And there has been a healthy benefit for those women who stay at home and raise their children. This is an article that appeared in my local newspaper in 2011. Its headline reads, Stay-at-home moms have healthier kids, study says. Now this was not planned, so women are figuring it out against what they were taught, and that is a healthy sign. But not all women have figured it out. This is Hillary Clinton, and I have heard her called the smartest woman in the world. I'd like to bring this comment she made about marriage to your attention. It was printed in 1974 in the Harvard Educational Review. The basic rationale for depriving people of rights in a dependency relationship is that certain individuals are incapable or undeserving of the right to take care of themselves, and consequently need social institutions specifically designed to safeguard their position. Along with the family, past and present examples of such arrangements include, catch this America, Hillary Clinton, include marriage and slavery. said that sometimes the smartest people in the world just don't get it. And I will let her thoughts of marriage go without any comment. Now, I'd like to return to Dr. Day's comments. Men will be constantly transferred by their companies to produce tension within the family. When I told this to a friend of mine who had worked for International Business Machines, abbreviated to IBM, he was shocked. He told me that as a young engineer, he and his co-workers had frequently moved or been moved from city to city, so much so that they claimed that the initials IBM stood for I've been moved. Euthanasia, meaning the killing of old people, will become common. There are reports in the year 2012 that President Obama's medical care for the American people will be rationed, yes, rationed, depending on an individual's, quote, quality life years remaining, end quote. Which means that many elderly people will not get medical care because it will be too expensive for the government program for the estimated time of life the person has left. This is called, once again, euthanasia, the murder of old people. Costs of medical care will increase so that old people cannot afford it, and this will cause the government to create a health care program for everyone, and then they will limit care to those who have a greater number of quality life years remaining. Medicine will become controlled. This has surely happened in a major way with Obamacare. The federal government now controls 1/8 of the nation's national product, the healthcare industry. And I must hasten to inform the American people, President Obama and the Congress of the United States is to be praised. They certainly chose the most efficient cost containment organization in handling the taxpayers' money. I've been collecting articles that amply show just how efficient the federal government can be when it comes to spending our tax money. I'd like to bring you these 13 sterling examples to your attention so all of you can marvel at just how efficient our government can be. I will not provide details on any of these examples, but will just show you how they accomplish this feat. March 1999, 20 pygmy owls to cost economy $425 million each. $425 million each. Total cost $8.5 billion in 15 years. December 2006, fraudulent Katrina hurricane aid may total $1 billion. December 2008, U.S.-led rebuilding of Iraq, a $117 billion failure. August 2009, U.S. rural airfare subsidies about to soar higher, total cost $175 million a year. November 2009, report cites $47 billion in bogus Medicare claims. December 2010, inmates sought tax refunds of $130 million from the United States. March 2011, brand names drugs cost Medicaid $329 million extra. April 2011, probe reports IRS paid more than $500 million in undeserved homebuyer credits. April 2011, conversion of the Ghost Ranch Lodge in Tucson to low-income housing. It was a motel. 112 units average cost per motel room sized units, $215,000 for each one. Total cost $25 million. May 2011, return aid Federal Emergency Management Agency tells flood and hurricane disaster victims. Total cost $22 million. Panel This is what August of 2011. Waste fraud in two war zones has cost the United States up to $60 billion. Postal Service girds for historic default, total cost $11 billion so far. And lastly, IRS gave out billions in refunds to identity thieves, total cost $26 billion for 5 years. Yes, indeedy, my fellow taxpayers, the federal government is certainly efficient at wasting our tax money. And I can hardly wait to see how much waste there will be when the federal government gets into the health insurance industry, about 1/8 of America's gross domestic product. Dr. Day, soon new diseases will appear for which there will be no cure. This was said before AIDS was discovered, and there are reputable doctors who have explained that the virus was created at Fort Detrick, Maryland, in this nation's chemical warfare research laboratory. And in addition, there have been all sorts of flus and viruses that have popped up since 1968, and maybe that was what Dr. Day was referring to. Some parents are concerned about giving their children vaccinations because they claim that they can cause serious diseases later on in their life. Maybe this is also what Dr. Day was referring to. The purposes of new diseases will be to reduce the population. The doctors who identified the AIDS virus claim that the World Health Organization, part of the United Nations, gave the virus in a smallpox vaccination to millions of Africans, thereby causing an AIDS epidemic. Religion, especially Christianity, will be destroyed. This, simply stated, is the goal of the 6,000-year-old ancient mystery religion, as will be discussed later in this presentation. But it is interesting that Dr. Day had discovered this truth during the years of 1965 to 1968. Education will slowly reduce the amount of information transmitted. Children will not learn as much. Now ask your children who George Washington was, and a typical response might be, "Isn't he the lead guitar for the Buffalo Stampede?" And here are some articles that show that Dr. Day's statement has most assuredly come true. This is an article that appeared in my local newspaper on July the 24th, 2012. The headline reads, "California Parents Win Quest to Take Over Failing School." The article reported that the parents had become dissatisfied with the results of the so-called education in the public school system. 2/3 of the children failed the state reading exam. More than half were not proficient in math. Nearly 80% failed the science exam. But this was not just something that popped up in the year 2012. The article reported that the school has not met state standards for 6 years. And scores had placed it in the bottom 10% of schools statewide. But critics were quick to point out that 6 years of such success were not long enough to determine whether or not there was a trend here. Now I must ask this question. Why were the teachers not taking some corrective action to improve the education of these children? Please remember that Dr. Day told us in 1969, education will slowly reduce the amount of information transmitted. In other words, these teachers knew the plan, don't teach anything. They were doing exactly what they were taught to do. The school year will be prolonged, including the teaching of students during the summer. These geniuses now want more time to teach nothing. When I was a student, the school year started after Labor Day, the first Monday in September, and ended around Memorial Day, the last Monday in May. But today, some school districts start school during the months of July or August. One of the important results of this change is that it further reduces the influence of the parents during the summer months. And this is in keeping with the plan of weakening the family in the teaching of the children. A lesser-known problem in America is the sanctioning of cheating, not by the students, but by the teachers. This is an article that appeared on July the 17th, 2011, about this very subject. The headline reads, "Report describes culture of test cheating in Atlanta schools." It reported that teachers spent nights in a back room erasing wrong answers on students' test sheets and filling in the correct ones. This means that when the government reports results on standardized tests, we, the public, cannot trust the announced results because many test papers have been altered. Investigators concluded that nearly half of the city schools allowed the cheating to go unchecked for as long as a decade, beginning in 2001. The report named 178 teachers and principals, and 82 of those confessed. Tens of thousands of children at the 44 schools were allowed to advance to higher grades even though they didn't know basic concepts. But the cheating even extends to the college classrooms as well. This is an article that appeared in my local newspaper on September the 7th, 2012, and it reports that Harvard University, supposedly an example of education excellence, is discovering that many of their students have cheated. It reports that allegations have been made against 125 students for improperly collaborating on a, get this, on a take-home final. Can no one not have guessed that students might check with their fellow classmates for counsel on how to answer the final questions on a take-home final? But the really depressing thought is that this cheating affects the grading of the students who did not collaborate but completed the final on their own. They are the real victims in this scandal. And the professors do not care. Secondly, what is the purpose of this at-home final when the student can refer to the textbook and the notes the student took during the professor's lecture, as well as collaborating with fellow students? The student spends thousands of dollars each semester to go to the university, and there is no incentive to actually attend the classes and to spend the time in study. What sort of nonsense is this? The article cited a book entitled The Cheating Culture, Why More Americans Are Doing Wrong to Get Ahead. This author makes the statement. You have surveys showing between 2/3 and 3/4 of college students cheat. And the leaders of higher education do not care. Or at least not enough to do anything about it. This is shocking because everyone who cheats diminishes the value of a college degree for those who did not. Keep saying to yourself, this is education, this is education. Actually, we should say, this is just as planned, just as planned. Drug use will increase with the purpose of increasing law enforcement. May I suggest that you watch my 4-hour DVD entitled America's Betrayal and Treason. Yes, America's Betrayal and Treason, for the reasons America fought that war. Let me briefly say that the Vietnam War was planned by our government in at least 1945. 19 years before it started in 1964, with the purpose of creating a drug culture in America so that communist China could sell heroin to the United States to get dollars from the U.S. government to purchase American war-making technology, and then years later have dollar bills to purchase some of this nation's national debt. Oh yes, there's one more thing that we got from this drug trade with communist China. And we got lots of these. In fact, we got 58,000 of these. I can almost guarantee you that watching this DV will change your ideas about the so-called drug war in the United States and why our government planned the war in 1945 in Vietnam. Identification will become required with something being implanted in the hand or forehead of each American. This has not happened yet, but the planners have it as a future agenda to follow. But the technology has been in place since at least the 1990s. This is a copy of a biochip compared to a penny, just so you can see how small it is. Food consumption will be reduced so that its distribution will have to be controlled. Notice that your supermarket is not registering you as a customer to keep track of what you purchase. These could be the records that the government will use if it imposes food rationing so that a huge bureaucracy will be able to plan the production of adequate supplies of the products we buy. Weather will become controllable to cause droughts and floods to reduce the food supply. This is page 30 of the People magazine of November the 28th, 1983, the 20th anniversary of the assassination of President John Kennedy. It asks various dignitaries where they were when they heard about the assassination of the president on the 20th anniversary of that assassination. And this is Reverend Theodore Hesburgh, the president of the University of Notre Dame, on the 20th anniversary of the assassination of President Kennedy. His response was, "Where were you on that day?" "I was with the members of the National Science Board. We were seeking a site for a laboratory for research into weather modification." This was in 1963, so weather modification is not a new idea. This is a photograph of the world's largest cargo plane, the C-5A Galaxy transport. And this is a poor quality photograph sent to me by a reader of a giant 40-ton electromagnet being unloaded from a C-5A at the Sheremetyevo airport in Moscow, Russia, on June the 19th, 1977. As you can see that the reader wrote that this picture came from a book entitled The U.S. War Machine by Dr. James E. Dornan, published in 1978. The electromagnetic device was funded by a $3.5 million federal grant by the American government to a manufacturing plant in Chicago. This device reportedly has the ability to modify the weather. Zbigniew Brzezinski, President Jimmy Carter's National Security Advisor, wrote the following in his book entitled Between Two Ages on page 57, published in 1970. Even the weather may be modified. And then he quotes an unnamed specialist in weather modification as saying, weather modification could be employed to produce periods of drought or storm, thereby weakening a nation's capacity and forcing it to accept the demands of the competitor. Of course, America's weather first has to pass over Russia before it reaches our shores. So the technology we sent Russia could be used to cause floods and drought in America to reduce the nation's food supply, just like Dr. Day reported in 1969. So weather modification is possible. Inflation of the money supply will lead to a single banking system. This has not occurred as of yet, but there is centralized control of the central banks, including America's central bank, the privately owned Federal Reserve, by the international network described by Dr. Carol Quigley. May I suggest that you consider watching my 2-hour DVD entitled Abolish the Federal Reserve, and you will learn the names of the 12 banking families that control all of the world's central banks. Taxes would become progressive, meaning that the middle and higher income families will be taxed to a higher degree, so that few could assemble wealth. You might remember that one of Barack Obama's campaign proposals was to tax those who earn more than $250,000 with a larger percentage than they are currently paying. Apparently, Barack Obama does not know that many of the very wealthy in America have tax-free foundations. So his proposal would not affect them because they pay no taxes at all. The late Senator Teddy Kennedy, certainly a proponent of big government, strangely had a tax-free foundation. He somehow didn't mind passing taxes on to you that he did not have to pay himself. Here's a question for you. Could tax-free foundations be the reason the very wealthy donate huge sums to the presidential candidates? Of course not. Who would even suggest such a thing? I would over here. I would. I think it would be appropriate at this point to discuss just what it is that Barack Obama is proposing and where the idea comes from. This is a sample of a graduated income tax table that I found on the internet. It might not be real, but it certainly can illustrate just how this thing works. You will notice that as a person's income rises, he pays a higher percentage of his income to the government in the form of taxes. For example, a man who earns less than $17,000 pays a tax of 10%, but a person who earns over $375,000 pays a tax of 35%. This is what Barack Obama wants to create in the United States. The rich pay a higher percentage, in fact even a higher percentage under his plan, of their income in taxes. But listen, I'm sorry, Barack baby, the president is not the originator of a graduated income tax. This idea is at least 184 years old. This is Karl Marx, the so-called father of communism, and he's the modern source of the graduated income tax. This is how he put it in his book entitled The Communist Manifesto, written in 1848. He discussed ways he could destroy a capitalist country to convert it to a communist country. He provided a platform of 10 planks, and I wish only to describe or to discuss one of them. In the most advanced countries, the following 10 planks will be pretty generally applicable. And the second plank was a heavy progressive or graduated income tax. He summarized the reason why he wanted to tax the very wealthy in his criticism of the Gotha program written in 1875. This is the very essence of the communist philosophy. From each, according to his abilities, to each, according to his needs. So the communist vision is to use government to take from the rich to give to the poor. And this is the vision of Barack Obama's support of a progressive graduated income tax, meaning he favors the communist proposal of using government to take from one who has earned it and give it to someone who has not earned it. You might remember the conversation he had with someone who has been called Joe the Plumber during the 2008 presidential campaign. I think when you spread the wealth around, it's good for everybody. Now I will ask you this. What is the difference between these two philosophies? Karl Marx wrote from each to each, and Barack Obama says spread the wealth around. And I would think you would have to agree there's no difference. Both take from one to give to another by the use of government force. You know something, years ago I remember someone teaching me two things. Thou shalt not steal, and thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods. Well, those sound pretty religious, and they're certainly obsolete because they're not pertinent to today's modern civilization. This is a little article that showed up in my local newspaper in 2008. It reported that a 25-year-old man had been sentenced to prison for using the internet to steal more than $1 million from a list of the Forbes 400 wealthy Americans. Now, the article didn't say it, but he was only doing what Barack Obama is proposing to the American people. He's using the internet to take from the rich to give to the poor, in this case meaning him. He was tried and convicted of stealing. The sentence marked in yellow by the red there says he was based in Moscow, Russia. One can only presume that he also believed in the Marxist communist philosophy. When you spread the wealth around, it's good for everybody. If I had been his attorney, and I'm not an attorney, I would have urged him to take the Obama plea. I demand justice. I was only doing what Barack Obama said I should do. I'm spreading the wealth around, and it's good for everybody, meaning me. Equal justice under the law means that all persons guilty of the same crime must be punished equally. But he's in prison, and Barack Obama is seeking re-election. One of the reasons the government of the United States was created was to protect property from thieves and from invading armies. And the reason that was so is because of the teachings of the 10 Commandments passed down to Moses many centuries before. As I said, 2 of these commandments are appropriate to the point I'm now trying to make. The 10th commandment is, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods. And the 8th one is that thou shalt not steal. Now this is an actual photograph of an armed robbery taken off the internet, and it shows a single robber using a gun to steal from a convenience store. Now why did this individual steal? First of all, he coveted his neighbor's goods, believing that the store owner had more than he, and he had little or none. So he decided to steal from the store owner because he believed that Barack Obama was right. Spreading the wealth around is good for everyone. And let's ask the question again. What's the difference between these two acts? The robber wants to share the wealth by stealing the store owner's wealth, and Barack Obama wants to share the wealth by using government to steal from the wealthy. Yet the robber is caught and he goes to jail, and Barack Obama remains President of the United States. Something is wrong in America when the government can steal legally from the wealthy, but the robber who steals from the wealthy goes to jail. One of the first books I read on the subject of government and why this process of sharing the wealth was wrong was this one entitled The Law, written in 1850 by Frederic Bastiat, a French economist, statesman, and author. It is probably the greatest little booklet ever written on the subject because it warns nations about what this concept leads to. This is what he wrote. How is the legal plunder to be identified? Quite simply, see if the law takes from some persons what belongs to them and gives it to other persons to whom it does not belong. When a portion of the wealth is transferred from the person who owns it without its consent, and whether by force or fraud, to anyone who does not own it, then I say that property is violated, that an act of plunder is committed. Then abolish this law without delay. If such a law is not abolished immediately, it will spread, multiply, and develop into a system. Well said, Mr. Bastier. We did not abolish it when it first reared its ugly head, and it has developed into a system. America, it's time to stop legal plunder. End of part 2. Please go to part 3. Part 3. Now let me return once more to the thoughts of Dr. Richard L. Day. Private ownership of housing would cease. High costs of housing would prevent new purchasers from buying homes. Now the house that I purchased in 1976 was selling for around $40,000, and today a similar house would cost $200,000. And that is happening exactly as Karl Marx in the Communist Manifesto said it must happen. This is what he wrote. The theory of the communists may be summed up in a single sentence. Abolition of private property. And Dr. Day said that he had learned that the private ownership of housing would cease. And we see that this is occurring just as the communists want in the recession of 2008 and 2012. This is a common sight across America today, foreclosed houses, where the owner more than likely lost his job and fell behind in his house payments. If Karl Marx was alive in 2012, he would be smiling, because one of his goals is being met here in America, just as planned. There was someone else who spoke about property just a few years later, and that was President Abraham Lincoln. His collected works show that these were his words on March the 21st, 1864. Property is the fruit of labor. It is a positive good in the world. That some should be rich shows that others may become rich, and hence is just encouragement to industry and enterprise. Let not him who is houseless pull down the house of another, but let him work diligently and build one for himself, thus by example assuring that his own shall be safe from violence when built. This is obviously the exact opposite of what Karl Marx said, and I would dare say that Abraham Lincoln was closer to the truth than Karl Marx. Are you listening, Barack Obama? One more thing that is happening in America would also cause Karl Marx to smile if he were alive today. And that is this, quote, recession, end quote, we are in, because it was planned as well. I would now like to submit a poor quality copy of a cartoon that appeared in the Chicago Tribune newspaper on April the 21st, 1934. This was right in the middle of the Great Depression of 1929, caused by the Federal Reserve. If that startled you that I claim that the Great Depression was created by the Federal Reserve, may I suggest that you consider watching my 2-hour DVD entitled Abolish the Federal Reserve for the details on how they accomplished that. This is once again the entire cartoon, and I would like to point out 2 parts of it to you. The first is this figure in the lower left-hand side of the cartoon. It appears as if the cartoonist was drawing a cartoon figure of Leon Trotsky, one of the major communists in the Russian Marxist Revolution of 1917 through about 1923. I've included a picture of Mr. Trotsky to show you that it appears as if the cartoonist was drawing him into the cartoon. You will notice that the cartoon figure of Trotsky has just finished lettering on this huge board, and the words are describing the communist plan for the United States. It reads, spend, spend, spend under the guise of recovery. Bust the government, blame the capitalists for the failure, junk the Constitution, and declare a dictatorship. I would think it is fair to say that with the exception of the dictatorship, this recession of 2008 is performing exactly as the communist Trotsky is describing as the plan for a Marxist communist America. Please notice that the cartoonist has added this comment to the upper left of the big board. He says, it, meaning this plan, worked in Russia. The second figure appears to be a cartoon of Joseph Stalin, the brutal communist dictator of Russia. Notice that he is saying how red, meaning communist, the sunrise is getting. In other words, how red America is becoming as they follow the plan of Leon Trotsky, a Marxist communist. Let me repeat what Trotsky wrote as a plan of action for the United States. Spend, spend, spend under the guise of recovery. Bust the government. Blame the capitalists for the failure. Junk the Constitution and declare a dictatorship. And the plan of action is happening exactly as the Marxist communist Trotsky was predicting. By the way, the crash of 1929 was the second of 2 major depressions that have occurred after the Federal Reserve was created in 1913. There was also a depression of 1920. When I was in college studying business, we discussed the crash of 1929, but we never discussed the depression of 1920, and there is a major reason why we did not. This is the fall 2009 edition of the Intercollegiate Review, described as a journal of scholarship and opinion, and one of its articles discussed the Depression of 1920. This is that article entitled Warren Harding, the President of the United States, elected in 1920, and the Forgotten Depression of 1920. I would like to quote 4 short paragraphs taken from that article. The economic situation in 1920 was grim. By that year, unemployment had jumped from 4% to nearly 12%, and the gross national product declined by 17%. In his 1920 speech accepting the Republican presidential nomination, Harding declared, "We will strike at government borrowing, which enlarges the evil, and we will attack the high cost of government with every energy and facility which attend Republican capacity. We promise that relief which will attend the halting of waste and extravagance, because it will be an example to stimulate thrift and economy in private life. Instead of fiscal stimulus, which means borrowing the money from the Federal Reserve as a way of trying to stimulate the economy with the creation of jobs, Harding cut the government's budget nearly in half between 1920 and 1922. Tax rates were slashed for all income groups, meaning that it opened up spending for those who had earned it and the national debt was reduced by 1/3. By the late summer of 1921, only a few months after Harding was inaugurated, signs of recovery were already visible. The following year, meaning 1921, unemployment was back down to 6.7% and was only 2.4% by 1923. Now you know why the Depression of 1920 has been forgotten. Harding did exactly the opposite of what Barack Obama has done for nearly 4 years. Now ask yourself, how come President Obama is not following the sterling example of President Harding? Harding solved a major depression in less than a year. And Obama has not had any effect on the recession of 2008 in 4 years. And this has been the result: foreclosures and the loss of jobs in America. And America suffers. Now let me address how Barack Obama's stimulus program has not worked. And the reason is simple. It was not intended to work. It was intended to increase the national debt. And to understand that, I would like to offer some basic understanding to the subject. When you borrow money from a bank, you're not borrowing the bank's money, you're borrowing money from the money deposited in the bank by your fellow citizens. So the banker is certainly aware of the fact that it is not his money he is lending, it belongs to his neighbors. And if he makes bad loans that will not be repaid, his neighbors could withdraw all of their deposits and the bank would close. So he must be cautious when he makes loans to be certain the borrower has the ability to repay it. If he is successful, his depositors will allow him to keep his job. Now let's presume that some governmental agency started putting pressure on the banker to make loans to persons who do not have the ability to repay the loan. If he values his job, he must refuse to make the loan no matter who puts pressure on him. Now we can begin our study of the recession America is currently in. This is an article that appeared in the New York Times newspaper on September the 30th, 1999, and it states that Fannie Mae, the government-sponsored enterprise that keeps money flowing to the housing and mortgage markets, will encourage banks to extend home mortgages to individuals whose credit is generally not good enough to qualify for conventional loans. Notice that the government is encouraging the banks to make loans to people that they know will not be able to pay them back. There's not a banker in the world who will make loans that he knows will not be repaid, yet the government is urging him to do so. The article then says that Fannie Mae is, quote, under pressure from the Clinton administration, meaning Bill Clinton, to expand the number of these loans that the banks make, end quote. That means the Clinton administration was urging the banks to knowingly lose money. By the way, please notice that nearly everyone in this picture, except the women standing to the left, are wearing black, the color traditionally worn when you attend a funeral. Were Bill Clinton and his cabinet members wearing black as if they were about to attend a funeral? Perhaps they knew something we did not know. But the article then quotes an expert on mortgage loans as saying, if they fail, the government will have to step up and bail them out. The government will have to step up and bail them out. Notice that this expert used the words, bail them out. This man put his finger on the entire scheme. The Clinton administration knew it was going to fail, and that there was a planned, quote, bailout, end quote, in the future. Let me explain the process on how this was to work. Step one, the banks make the bad loans. They know they will be bailed out. And sure enough, in step two, Fannie Mae bails them out so that the banks do not lose money. Step three, Fannie Mae goes to the government and asks to be bailed out so they don't lose money. And step four, the government bails them out. Step five, the government needs to be bailed out. Step number six, so they borrow the money from the Federal Reserve so the government does not lose money. Step number seven, the Federal Reserve needs to be bailed out and they get paid back by step number eight, the taxpayers, so the Federal Reserve does not lose money. Step number nine, the only party to this pre-planned sequence that does not get bailed out are the taxpayers, and they get no bailout. So the American people lose their jobs and their homes, just as planned. This article laid out the entire plan. It was started by the Clinton administration. The entire thing worked, and Barack Obama is smiling. There he is, the smiling Barack Obama. And so is Karl Marx, because this entire thing came off just as planned. Before I leave this subject, I would like to mention something else. I've long searched the internet for a picture of a smiling Karl Marx, and I must admit there are none. But I believe he would be smiling because he knew there would be people like Barack Obama who believe his theories and would put them into practice. And that's why Barack Obama is smiling. There he is, the smiling Barack Obama. And one last thought. I shall end this presentation with the evidence. Notice that I'm saying the evidence. I'm going to present the evidence that Barack Obama is a Marxist communist. I will prove this. These comments will follow shortly. Now let me return to the thoughts of Dr. Day. This quotation that follows will be the last of them from the doctor, but it is possibly the most important of them all, as I shall soon explain. This is what Dr. Day said he learned. Terrorism would increase so that the public would relinquish control of their lives to an increasing government. And I would like to provide some comments that will show you just how important this comment by Dr. Day is. And to do that, I must introduce you to a leading power in this country and in the world as well, and that is worldwide Freemasonry, also called Masonry. By the way, may I suggest that you remember this symbol of the Masons for the reasons that will follow. It is called the square and the compass, the joining of two objects, a square to draw straight lines and a compass to make curved lines. I will make this brief because I've fully explored this organization in other books and DVDs. But first, let me all provide you with a few quotations written by major Masonic writers or writers closely in tune with the Masons. The first two quotes come from Manly P. Hall, a member of the Masons and one of the most prolific writers on the mystery religion. Freemasonry is the most powerful organization in the land. It is an ordainer of kings. Its hand has shaped the destinies of worlds. This next quotation was written by Arthur Edward Waite, not a Mason, but a supporter of the same goals. Beneath the broad tide of human history, there flow the stealthy undercurrents of the secret societies, which frequently determine in the depths the changes that take place upon the surface. This is another quotation from Manly P. Hall. The ancient initiates are the invisible powers behind the thrones of earth, and men are but marionettes dancing while the invisible ones pull the strings. We see the dancers, but the mastermind that does the work remains concealed by the cloak of silence. The following quotation is from a leading supporter of the New Age religion called Charles Leadbeater, but I can find no evidence that he was a member of the Masonic Lodge. He wrote this in his book entitled Freemasonry and Its Ancient Mystic Rites, published in 1926. The hidden life of Freemasonry, the mighty force in the background, always at work, yet always out of sight. The next quotation comes from the book that I've already quoted from, entitled The Externalization of the Hierarchy, and it shows just how important the Masons are in the future plan of this conspiracy. The three main channels through which the preparation for the New Age might be regarded as the Church, meaning I believe the Christian Church, which has been infiltrated by believers in this plan. The educational field, meaning our schools, which are teaching our children the plan, and the Masonic fraternity. And then Alice Bailey tells the reader why. The Masonic movement will meet the need of those who can and should wield power. It is the custodian of the law. It is a far more occult organization than can be realized, and is intended to be the training school for the coming advanced occultists. So the Masons are far more important than most Americans realize. They will be major players when the New World Order is ushered in. Now that was a brief introduction into the power of the Masonic Lodge. I will mention a couple of the books that I've written on the Masonic Lodge at the end of this presentation, should you wish additional information. To understand Freemasonry, it is imperative that we must understand the role that one man, Albert Pike, played in it. And this is a picture of Mr. Pike showing some of his Masonic attire. There is a statue of him in Washington, D.C., and the plaque at the base of it reads as follows. Dedicated 1977 under the auspices of Henry C. Clausen, Sovereign Grand Commander of the Scottish Rite Mother Jurisdiction, to the loving memory of Albert Pike, leader of the worldwide Masonic movement, and then I've added from 1859 to 1891. So Mr. Pike was a key member of the Masonic Lodge, not only in the United States, but around the world. So what this man wrote certainly would carry weight amongst the worldwide Masonic fraternity. What you are about to read is quite possibly the most controversial material written by or attributed to him. The claim is made by some researchers that he wrote a letter to the Italian Giuseppe Mazzini, another key Masonic leader, on August the 15th, 1871, in which Pike outlined the Masonic plan for three world wars. If you are not familiar with Mr. Mazzini, let me give you a few facts about him for your information. He was born in 1805 and passed away in 1872. And he was also the founder of the Mafia. The M in Mafia stands for Mazzini. There are some who do not believe that Mr. Pike wrote this letter, and therefore it is a fraud. However, one can only wonder how anyone would know that an individual did not write a letter unless the individual himself denied it, and there is no known record that Pike ever disavowed this letter. The letter is a blueprint for events that would play themselves out in the 20th and 21st centuries, with some of these events yet to come. It is this blueprint which we believe unseen leaders in the world are following today, knowingly or not, to engineer the planned third and final World War. The first place where I found this letter was in a book written in 1957 entitled The Mystery of Freemasonry Unveiled. The author of that book was Cardinal Caro E. Rodriguez of Santiago, Chile, and he claimed that the letter was documented in 1895 in another book, so that if both of these books are legitimate, it was certainly written prior to the First World War, which started in 1914 and lasted until around 1918. The letter that Pike wrote shows that in 1871 he worked out a military blueprint for 3 world wars, 2 of which would occur in the 20th century. So now I would like to provide you with the extracts of that letter, showing you how 3 world wars have been planned for many generations. The First World War, as I said, from 1914 to about 1918, must be brought about in order to permit the Illuminati, as I said before, founded in 1776 by Adam Weishaupt in Bavaria, and later to infiltrate Freemasonry, permit the Illuminati to overthrow the power of the czars in Russia, and of making that country a fortress of atheistic communism. The Second World War, as I said, from 1941 to 1945, must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences between the fascists and the political Zionists. Zionism is defined by Webster's as a movement for colonizing Jews in Palestine. This war must be brought about so that the German socialism is destroyed, and that the political Zionism be strong enough to institute a sovereign state of Israel in Palestine. During the Second World War, international communism must become strong enough in order to balance Christendom, which would then be restrained. By the way, there was one bonus for both of these wars. The people who make those little white things, made a lot of them. In fact, estimates are that 17 million died in World War I and 53 million died in World War II. But I am certain their grieving relatives understand that this was a sacrifice that their relatives made so that these planners could bring about that new world order. Now let me return to the World War plans of Albert Pike. The Third World War must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences caused by the Illuminati between the political Zionists and the leaders of the Islamic world. There it is, I'm sorry, I got behind. The differences caused by the Illuminati between the political Zionists and the leaders of the Islamic world. Now comes the real shocker. We shall, notice we, meaning Pike included, we shall unleash the nihilists. Now, nihilism is defined by Webster's as any violent revolutionary movement involving the use of terrorism. Terrorism. We shall provoke a formidable social cataclysm. And on September the 11th, 2001, this network unleashed the nihilists a violent revolutionary movement involving the use of terrorism. Someone planned the plan. Someone followed the plan. World War III between the terrorist world and the civilized world has already started. And it started on September the 11th, 2001. And to conclude my remarks on the 9/11 attack, I want to make my position crystal clear. 9/11 was an inside job. That means it too was planned years in advance. In other words, the 9/11 attack was the result of the plans of a conspiracy. The event was totally controlled by the American government. And I say that even though I remember the words of George W. Bush when he spoke to the United Nations just 2 months later on November the 10th, 2001. This is what he said. Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories concerning the attacks of September the 11th. Malicious lies that attempt to shift the blame away from the terrorists themselves, away from the guilty. And I say this to President Bush. If I was to testify under oath, I would continue to declare that 9/11 was an inside job, and then I would present the evidence that it was. I would say that any fair-minded person who studies the hundreds of hours of videos on the internet must conclude that the American government planned the event in its entirety. And the reason they did was to inflame the American people into accepting a war in Afghanistan and Iraq. The United States government has had a history of doing exactly that in at least 3 other wars they entered into. Franklin Roosevelt as Assistant Secretary of the Navy and Winston Churchill appointed as the English First Lord of Admiralty are both members of the Masons with the full support of Woodrow Wilson, President, not a member, planned on sinking the Lusitania, a huge ocean liner with Americans on board, off of the coast of Great Britain by placing the ship in an area where they knew German submarines were as a way of inflaming the American people against Germany so that we would enter World War I. The Lusitania was sunk by a torpedo fired from a nearby German submarine, and America was inflamed so as to allow the American government to enter the war. The plan worked, the Lusitania was sunk, and we entered World War I. This is all covered in far more detail in my book entitled The Unseen Hand, and in the book entitled The Lusitania by Colin Simpson. The second instance of a planned event occurred when the American government goaded Japan into attacking our armed forces at Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, as a way for America to enter World War II. The evidence is abundant that this is so, and once again is fully documented in my book, The Unseen Hand. And thirdly, the American government planned the Vietnamese War in at least 1945, even though it did not officially start until 1964. And to get us militarily involved, America planned a non-event, meaning the event did not happen. The North Vietnamese allegedly attacked this nation's destroyers in the Gulf of Tonkin in international waters, and the American government used this episode as a way of inflaming the American people to enter the war. Robert McNamara, the Secretary of Defense during the time of the Gulf of Tonkin incident, has recently admitted that the attack never happened. The viewer can see this man's testimony on a video he made to explain how all of this happened. This is on YouTube, and the viewer is urged to see it for themselves. And this plan worked as well. The American people were told that the attack actually happened and that we needed to retaliate because of this attack. So the 9/11 attack was the fourth example of how our government created an incident so that the American people would support their plans for a war. I would like to now provide you with some very disturbing information about how it came to be that Osama bin Laden would create the terrorist organization called Al-Qaeda for the 9/11 attack on the World Trade Center in 2001. And to do so, I must go back to the invasion of Afghanistan by Russia in December of 1979. In 1980, Congressman Ron Paul released a press release about the invasion route the Russians took to invade Afghanistan. This is a photograph of part of the 300-mile double-lane highway that was constructed by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. The road was constructed in some of the most inaccessible mountain territory on Earth. It rose as high as 8,000 feet and consisted of 50 bridges and 2,000 culverts. And he reported that the United States was careful to connect our road to the one the Russian Army engineers were building to the border between Russia and Afghanistan. In other words, the United States and their partner Russia built hundreds of miles of highway to allow the Russian tanks and trucks easy access into Afghanistan. And a few months after the road was completed, Russia invaded. This is Secretary of State Hillary Clinton on the right, of course, who on July the 19th, 2001, on the Greta Van Susteren program on Fox News, gave Greta this statement. We had helped create the problem we are now fighting, meaning terrorism by Al-Qaeda. When the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, we had this brilliant idea that we were going to come to Pakistan to create a force of mujahideen, equip them with Stinger missiles and everything else to go after the Soviets. And we were successful. The Soviets left the nation, leaving them well armed. Now you look back, the people we are fighting today, we were supporting in the fight against the Soviets. Now as the war neared its end in 1988, Osama bin Laden organized Al-Qaeda. In other words, if we had not built the road to allow the Soviets to invade Afghanistan, we wouldn't have had Al-Qaeda to attack the World Trade Center on September the 11th, 2001. In other words, we built the road so that Al-Qaeda would attack the World Trade Center. Yes, 9/11 was planned by the United States before we built the road connecting Afghanistan to the road built by the Russians. Thank you, Hillary, for telling us the truth. Thus end the thoughts of Dr. Richard Day. I'm hoping that you can see that many of the things he said in 1969 have come to pass or are being brought to fruition as we speak. So in conclusion, I will dare say that Planned Parenthood is not only a population control center, but apparently it is also a school for those who need to be made aware that there is a plan for America. And during the course of his employment there, they made Dr. Day aware of it. We have seen that Karl Marx, the so-called father of communism, also knew there was a plan. This is why he wrote it down in the Communist Manifesto by an already existing organization, one that had been created 72 years before. That organization that fomented the plan was the Illuminati, formed in 1776. Karl Marx was a member of the Illuminati. We have seen that America was set on the course it is currently on by this plan. And now I would like to end this presentation with the evidence that the reason Barack Obama supports the plan is because Barack Obama is a Marxist communist. Now, I would like to invite all of you to be on a jury and listen to all of the evidence that I will present in support of that statement before you reach a verdict. Because the future that this plan has for America will not be fun. And all moral men and women must educate themselves and then share that knowledge with others so that all of us can put a stop to their future plans for this nation and ultimately the world. Now let me begin the process of providing you with the evidence that Barack Obama is a Marxist communist. This is the book he wrote entitled Dreams from My Father, published in 1995 and updated in 2004. And a good place to start would be on page Roman numeral 12, where Mr. Obama praises his mother. And this is what he says about her. My mother helped my sister and me, and that what is best in me I owe to her. And this is what he tells us about her views about the world. She, my mother, was a lonely witness for secular humanism. I would like to take a few moments for those not familiar with secular humanism. This is a religious view of man. And they have published 3 manifestos, meaning their position papers. The first was in 1933, the second in 1973, and the third was in 2003. Barack's mother passed away in 1995, so she could not have known about Humanist Manifesto 3, so I will concentrate on the first 2 as a way of showing you just what she believed in. This is a booklet containing copies of both Humanist Manifestos 1 and 2, and I shall only discuss those positions that are pertinent to our discussion of possibly how Barack Obama first learned about communism. This is position number 14 of the first manifesto. The humanists are firmly convinced that existing, acquisitive, and profit-motivated society has shown itself to be inadequate, and that a radical change in method, controls, and motives must be instituted. A socialized and cooperative economic order must be established to the end that the equitable distribution of the means of life be possible. Humanists demand a shared life in a shared world. If you read that correctly, it could have been written by Karl Marx, a communist and a humanist. Now let me repeat what Barack Obama told Joe the plumber during the presidential campaign of 2008. I think when you spread the wealth around, it's good for everybody. So Barack Obama's mother was a Marxist communist, although she reportedly declared herself to be a secular humanist. Remember what Barack Obama said about his mother, and that what is best in me I owe to her. In case Barack's mother read Humanist Manifesto 2 to learn the positions of the secular humanists, I would like to quote from position number 15, because this one increases the size and scope of sharing the wealth to an international scope. Extreme disproportions in wealth and income should be reduced on a worldwide basis. This would change Karl Marx's dictum to from each nation from each nation according to its ability, to each nation according to its needs. Suddenly, Barack Obama's views about sharing the wealth are revealed in the views of his mother. But these thoughts were for a very young Barack Obama. In his book, he shared the names of others who shared their communist views with him. During high school, Barack said on page 85, he gathered up books from the library, and some of those books he read were written by W.E.B. Du Bois. In 1961, the Communist Party announced a letter that Mr. Du Bois had written to them that said, in part, "During the 1920s and 30s, I began to study Karl Marx and the communists. Communism is the only way to human life. In the end, communism will triumph. I want to help bring that day. The path of the American Communist Party is clear." And then he listed 10 platform positions, only one of which I shall mention here. It was the third one, and it read, the limitation of personal income. Once again, how does that compare with, I think when you spread the wealth around, it's good for everybody? Another writer that Barack Obama read was Langston Hughes, a poet, a writer of plays, novels, and motion picture and television scripts. One of his most celebrated poems was Goodbye Christ, and it contained these lines, "Make way for a new guy, a real guy named Marx Communist." And in his poem entitled Ballad of Lenin, meaning Nikolai Lenin, the brutal communist dictator of Russia, he wrote, "Move over, Comrade Lenin, and give me room. I fought with you, Comrade Lenin. I lived for you, Comrade Lenin. The world is our room." Mr. Hughes never admitted membership in the Communist Party of the United States. But two former Communist Party officials, Louis Bedens and Manning Johnson, testified under oath that they knew Hughes to be a member of the Communist Party. Yes, Barack Obama was learning his lessons well from these communists. Later, when Barack Obama enrolled at Occidental College in 1979, he told us in his book that, "I chose my friends carefully," and then he listed several groups that he chose, including the Marxist professors. Yes, Barack Obama wanted to continue his study of the communist ideology by learning from the Marxist professors on the Occidental faculty. Mr. Obama only spent 2 years at Occidental, and he then transferred to Columbia University to finish his 4-year college experience. Now the question remains, did he seek out the Marxist professors on the campus of Columbia as he did at Occidental? And I'll provide you with some evidence that he did. This is a book entitled Barack H. Obama, The Unauthorized Biography by Webster Griffin Tarpley. He made this observation on page 52 of his book. In a speech in Iowa, during a speech he delivered during the 2008 presidential campaign, Mr. Obama told the audience this, "Zbigniew Brzezinski is someone I have learned an immense from." He further praised him with these words, "He's one of our most outstanding scholars and thinkers." Mr. Brzezinski was Professor Brzezinski at Columbia from 1960 to 1989, which means he was there during Barack Obama's junior and senior years at Columbia. And while he was there, he was the head of the Institute for Communist Affairs. So we can now determine what it was that Barack Obama learned from Professor Brzezinski. This is a book written by him in 1970 while he was a professor at Columbia, and we can read, quite possibly, one of the books that his student Barack Obama read. It is entitled Between Two Ages. I will now quote a total of 13 statements of his that reflect his support of the communist ideology. The viewer might think that this is a bit excessive, but I just want the viewer to see that this professor really believed in Marxist communism and that I am citing his own words. I'm doing this to show you that Professor Brzezinski is a self-professed Marxist communist. These are those 13 comments by Professor Brzezinski. Marxism represented a further vital and creative stage in the maturing of man's universal vision. Marxism is a victory of reason over belief. Marxism puts a premium on guides to action derived from an examination of its belief. Marxism did expand popular self-awareness by awakening the masses to social equality and by providing them with an historical justification for insisting upon it. Marxism represented the most advanced method of extrapolating from it certain principles concerning social behavior. Marxism has served as a mechanism of human progress, even if its practice has often fallen short of ideals. Now, just for the record, the Marxist Russian Communist Revolution of 1917 to 1923 murdered as many as 40 million Russians. And the Chinese Communist Revolution of 1927 to about 1949 murdered more than 60 million Chinese. I wonder if these examples of communism's practice are the ones that he claims have fallen short of its ideals. Maybe, just maybe, he somehow forgot to explain just how its practices had fallen short of its ideals. Perhaps the reason that communism's practice has fallen short of its ideals is because of one man, Sergei Nechayev. He wrote a little pamphlet entitled The Revolutionary Catechism, and it was the foundation for the entire communist revolution in Russia from 1917 until 1923. According to Robert Payne in his book entitled The Life and Death of Lenin, meaning Nikolai Lenin, this pamphlet was read by Lenin and profoundly influenced him. In all its essentials, it would remain the guiding principle of Lenin's political, meaning in this case, communist activity. So the student of communism must read Nechayev to understand why communism was so brutal in the Russian Communist Revolution of 1917. The following are taken from this little booklet. The revolutionary is a doomed man. Everything in him is wholly absorbed in the single thought and the single passion for revolution. He has broken all the bonds which tie him to the social order and the civilized world. The revolutionary must be tyrannical towards others. For him, morality is everything which contributes to the triumph of the revolution. Night and day, he must have but one thought: merciless destruction. Can you believe someone actually put this in writing? Merciless destruction. He must be prepared to destroy himself and destroy with his own hands everything that stands in the path of the revolution. He should not hesitate to destroy any person, any place, or any man. He must hate everyone and everything in it with an equal hatred. This filthy social order can be split into several categories. The first category comprises those who must be condemned to death without delay. When the order of execution is prepared, no private sense of outrage should be considered. And the orders of execution must have been written for 40 million Russians. And their only crime was living in a capitalist society and not wanting to live in a communist one. Nowhere in Brzezinski's book can I find one mention of the name of Sergei Nechayev. So one can certainly understand why Professor Brzezinski did not feel any sense of moral outrage when this example of communism practice fell short of its ideals. And that's why Professor Brzezinski so admired the communist philosophy. Now let me return to the thoughts of Brzezinski as contained in his book entitled Between Two Ages. It has been Marxism that has served to stir the mind and to mobilize human energies purposely. The major contribution of Marxism is its broadening influence, which opened man's mind to previously ignored perspectives. Marxism represents an important and progressive stage. Marxism represented a major advance in man's ability to conceptualize his relationship to the world. Marxism provided a unique intellectual tool for harnessing the fundamental forces of our time. Marxism supplied the best available insight into contemporary reality. And finally, Marxist theory is the standard bearer of this century's most influential system of thought, and as the social model for resolving the key dilemmas facing modern man. Yes, indeed, Professor Brzezinski is a self-professed Marxist communist. And he could have served as a real teacher of Marxism to young Barack Obama if he had continued to, quote, choose his friends wisely, end quote, and continued to seek out the Marxist professors. Did I fail to mention that Zbigniew Brzezinski was President Jimmy Carter's National Security Advisor? Because he was. Apparently Jimmy didn't read Brzezinski's book entitled Between Two Ages. I know this is but a brief review of Barack Obama's history, but I think we can also say, yes indeed, Barack Obama is a Marxist communist. He's told us that in his own words. By the way, and certainly not essential to our study of the New World Order, there is a group who also wanted to admire the writings of Karl Marx, and that was the Beatles. This is the cover of their Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band that was released in 1967. Apparently this album was a great hit amongst those who enjoyed what has been called rock and roll music. It has been called the most important rock and roll album ever made. As you can see, the album cover is made up of a collage of individuals apparently collected together to hear the Lonely Hearts Band in front of them. One of the sites on the internet about this album said that the Beatles picked these people out as being, quote, some of their favorite celebrities, end quote, and I would like to point out two of them. This is a close-up of the picture of Karl Marx in the crowd, one of the favorite celebrities of the Beatles. And the other one is Aleister Crowley, an occultist and a habitual drug user of opium and cocaine, amongst others. The English media called Mr. Crowley the wickedest man alive, apparently because of his libertine lifestyle. He is the author of the book entitled The Book of the Law, published in 1938. The author claimed that the book was dictated to him by a spiritual being called Awas, while Crowley was in Egypt. Please remember that J.Z. Knight was contacted by a spiritual being called Ramtha. I guess I'm a failure. The only spiritual beings who contact me are, are those crummy bill collectors. The book consists of but 50 small pages, but the essence of the lesson I was shared is on page 9. This book lays down a simple code of conduct. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. And then he amplified that with these comments, continued on page 9, and then on page 31. All events are equally lawful. This means that each man is free to decide what he wants to do. Every decision of his is permitted. Now that sounds just like what Ramtha taught J.Z. Knight and what she taught Terry Cole Whitaker. But read this from page 31. Be strong, O man. Lust. Enjoy all things of sense. Maybe this is the reason the Beatles felt Aleister Crowley was one of their favorite celebrities. Now, in conclusion, I would like to bring in an expert on communism to attest to the virtues of the system. Perhaps I've been a little too harsh on the system during the presentation. This expert has lived the joys of the communist system for 53 years, ever since he assumed the presidency of his country in 1959. And that expert is, of course, Fidel Castro, the president of Cuba, a communist nation. This man's credentials are impeccable. He has seen Cuba as a communist nation ever since 1959. In fact, he was the one that led the revolution to create the communist state. Now let's see if his views about the joys of communism still hold true. This is an article that appeared in my local newspaper on September the 9th, 2010. And as you can see, the headline reads, Fidel, economic system no longer works. The article reported that Castro told a visiting American journalist that the Cuban model doesn't even work for us anymore. The article continued, the state controls well over 90% of the economy, paying Cuban workers salaries of $20 a month in return for free health care and education, and nearly free transportation and housing. At least a portion of every citizen's food needs are sold to them through ration books at heavily subsidized prices. The communists have warned Cubans that they need to start working harder and expecting less from government. Barack Obama, are you listening? This article appeared in my local newspaper on July the 17th, 2012, and the headline reports, Communist Cuba faces the unthinkable, cutting jobs from its bloated workforce. This is the close-up of the photo accompanying the article, which reports, at a state project to refurbish a decaying building in Old Havana, one worker paints a wall while two watch. A fourth sleeps in a wheelbarrow in a sliver of shade, and two more smoke and chat on the curb. Here, nearly everyone works for the state, and official unemployment is minuscule. But pay is so low that the Cubans like to joke that the state pretends to pay us, and we pretend to work. The article says that the state employs 95% of the official workforce. Raul Castro, Fidel's brother, who took over for Fidel in 2006, was quoted as saying, without people feeling the need to work to make a living, sheltered by state regulations that are excessively paternalistic and irrational, we will never stimulate a love for work. Obama, President Obama, are you paying attention? And lastly, in 2011, Cuba allowed the Cuban people to actually purchase real estate and a personal automobile. There was no discussion about a heavy graduated income tax to force the Cubans to pay more in taxes. President Obama, are these articles telling you something? One of the world's leading communists just announced that communism does not work. Of course, I've been proving this in my classes and in my books and videos I've produced since 1973. But President Obama never attended any of my classes, nor has he, to the best of my knowledge, ever read any of my books or watched any of my videos. So, of course, he couldn't possibly know that communism is a total fraud. It has never worked anywhere in the world. Now let me give you one clue that there is a reason that Cuba became a communist nation and then was kept as a communist nation until the cracks started to show in 2010. There are coded messages concealed in 4 major days of Fidel Castro's life that need to be explored. Fidel Castro named his revolution the 26th of July movement. July is the 7th month of the year, and 26 is the number of the day. 7 plus 26 equals 33, and 33 is the number of the highest degree in Freemasonry. And to show you just how concealed this number is, this is once again the symbol of the Masonic Lodge, a square and a compass. And the 2 points of the compass form an angle of 33 degrees on a 360-degree circle. Fidel Castro named his brigade the 26th of July movement after his guerrilla army invaded the Moncada barracks of the Cuban army in the small village called Oriente on July the 26th, 1953. July is the 7th month, plus 2 and 6, which are the days, and plus 1, plus 9, plus 5, plus 3 equals 33, the highest degree in Masonry. Castro's army rolled victoriously into Havana on January 8, 1959. January is the first month, plus 8 for the day, plus 1, plus 9, plus 5, plus 9 equals 33, the highest degree in Masonry. Fidel Castro was sworn in as Prime Minister of Cuba on February the 16th, 1959. February is the 2nd month of the year, plus 1, plus 6, plus 1, plus 9, plus 5, plus 9 equals 33, the highest degree in Masonry. Now there are only 4 explanations of why he hid this Masonic number in 4 of these significant dates in his past. He just liked the number for some unexplained personal reason. He is informing Masons all over the world that he is a 33rd degree Mason. He was doing it to let others know that the Masons are the major supporter of his communist revolution in Cuba. Or he was doing this for a far more frightening reason. He is an initiate into the ancient mystery religion, just like many of the writers I've discussed in this presentation who have embraced it as well. I will let you ponder which one of those is correct. If you want to know more about the ancient mystery religion and its connection to Masonry, may I suggest that you watch my 8-hour DVD entitled Conspiracy Against Christianity. This DVD will be the last one you will need to watch because it will show the viewer exactly what this new world order is and why these planners want to create it. As an inducement for you to watch it, may I ask each of you this one question. What is the difference between liberty and freedom? If you said that they are synonyms, meaning they mean the same thing, I will show you that they are not synonyms at all. They are antonyms, meaning they are words with opposite meanings. This DVD will explore that, and after you've seen the difference, America's history will start to make sense. Once again, that DVD is entitled Conspiracy Against Christianity, and it's on YouTube. Now, while I'm discussing this, please understand that even if you are not a Christian, this plan of the planners will substantially affect you and the way you live your life. But let me return to the Castro and Cuba story for one last bit of information. The newspapers have reported for years that the American government, perhaps through the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, have made numerous attempts to assassinate Fidel Castro. And as I read the reports, I intuitively surmised that none of them would succeed. And the reason is that it was the American government that placed Fidel Castro into the seat of power in Cuba. For those who want further details, may I suggest that you read my book entitled The Unseen Hand, because I document the case to prove my contentions. Simply stated, the American people wanted Fidel Castro to communize Cuba. Now let me return to Fidel Castro's coded use of the number 33 in 4 of the significant days in his life. I will provide you with one clue by recalling a couple of quotes that Manly P. Hall wrote that I've quoted before in this presentation. The first one was this: Masonry is the most powerful organization in the land. And this is the second one. It is an ordainer of kings. Its hand has shaped the destinies of worlds. Maybe it was the Masons who ordained Fidel Castro as King of Cuba. That might be the best answer of all. And I will offer this one additional evidence that the Masons do control the destinies of worlds. Fox News on September the 16th, 2012, told its audience that there were 33 nations protesting the so-called movie that many were claiming had defamed Allah, the God of the Muslims. Did you notice that? 33 nations, not 32 or 34, protesting this video. As I said, the implication of that comment is that the Masons do indeed control the destinies of worlds. This is Whittaker Chambers' face from the past, but certainly not known by many in the United States today, and he has an interesting story to tell. He wrote a book entitled Witness in 1952, in which he discussed 2 major decisions in his life. The first was when he joined the Communist Party of the United States in 1925. He reported that he worked his way through the party until he was the contact man between a powerful Soviet-Russian espionage apparatus in Washington and my superior in New York City. Because one single episode caused him to realize that communists were wrong. And this episode caused him to leave the Communist Party, and he relates how it happened. I was sitting in our apartment. My daughter was in her high chair, and I was watching her eat. My eye came to rest on the delicate convolutions of her ear. The thought passed through my mind, no, those ears were not created by any chance coming together of atoms in nature, which is, of course, the communist view. They could have been created only by immense design. And he went to his wife and explained his discovery and she also pondered what he had seen. Because of this thought, they both left the Communist Party. President Obama, have you really looked at the human ear recently? But the most frightening thing Mr. Chambers said was this: we are leaving the winning world for the losing world. Was he right? I will let you reflect on that question. There once was a very stupid man who tried to trick a very wise man. He put a peanut in its shell in his hand, and then clenched his fingers to conceal the peanut from view. He approached the wise man and said to him, I will ask you one question, and by your answer I can tell you if you are indeed a wise man. And then he showed the wise man his clenched fist. He asked the wise man this question: is the peanut in my hand in the shell, or is it outside the shell? Thinking that if the wise man said it is in the shell, he would crush the peanut and then open his hand to reveal that it was outside the shell. If the wise man said it is outside the shell, he would open his fingers to reveal that it was in the shell. The wise man thought for a few moments and then said, the event is in your hand. Truly, wise men today will see that the future of their world is in their hands. Thank you so very much, and may God bless America.